Good morning and happy Saturday. I hope you're all doing well. It is 10 a.m. on this fine Saturday morning, and we've got a really good show for you today. I hope you're all doing well. I will just say that this episode first debuted on Patreon. So if you'd like to become a member, you can go to colememo.com/Patreon. That's COLEMEMO.com/PATREON. It only costs $3 a month, and members get first dibs on new content. So just a pro tip, if you're going to sign up, I know a lot of people have Apple phones or Apple devices. If you're going to do that, I would recommend signing up from a non-Apple device, and then you can log in on your Apple device. And the reason I say that is because Apple is greedy and adds extra charges on what I consider to be that very fair price of $3 a month. So if you want to avoid extra fees that just go to Apple and only pay that $3 that goes to me and helps to support the show, again, that's how I would recommend signing up for it. Sorry for the little bit of a workaround, but I just wanted to be transparent that I think $3 is a fair price. But with this thing that Apple's been doing, yeah, it makes it just a little bit a touch over $3, which is not cool. If you can't support on Patreon, that's totally okay. I would say the best way to support this show is at Cole Memo. By subscribing to this show and liking the episode from wherever you are listening from. As the kids say, smash that like button. Some other options to support the show is if you buy cannabis drinks. This one is a drink by Cantrip. It's a 50 milligram drink. They have lower dosed drinks if that dose is a little bit too high for you. They've got all different types of drinks, including cola, root beer, seltzers, and more. And if you go to drinkcantrip.com/ColeMemo, you can get 15% off, and then 15% of your order goes to me so that I can buy more sodas. So if you haven't already, subscribe, hit that like button, and we'll get this episode started right after this message.
Here in the Midwest, growing amazing food isn't just a hobby, it's who we are. And that's why we created Envy Plant Foods. Whether you're working on a farm or starting a backyard garden, growing hot peppers for sandwiches, or cool lettuce for a chopped salad, Envy has the perfect plant food for you. Blended in Illinois since 1962. Support the Cole Memo and save. Get 10% off fertilizer for your wheat garden at envyplantfoods.com with code CHILL10. Plus, an additional 10% of your order will go to the Cole Memo to help fund the show. Again, that's envyplantfoods.com.
Just a quick heads up, our friends are joining us today from the Chicagoland area, so you might hear a few trains in the background. I appreciate your patience with audio fluctuations, and thanks for sticking with us throughout. Before we jump into today's conversation, I wanted to take a moment to lay some groundwork. And I say a moment, but I've got a lot to say here. And that's because understanding how we got to this point where I personally stand on this issue is key to understanding what we're talking about and why I think it's worth showcasing in this episode. And since I don't want to assume any of you are regular viewers of the show, I think everything I'm about to share is important context. So during this intro, I'll walk through how cannabis policy has evolved over the years, how the legal status of the plant has shifted at both state and federal levels, and how those changes have fueled the policy debate we're diving into today. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but I want to make sure I cover all my bases here. So, over the past few decades, the United States has seen a shift in cannabis laws. What started as a push for decriminalization, in other words, reducing penalties for possession, use, cultivation, and sale of cannabis, evolved into the rollout of medical programs in the 90s, and eventually into the tax and regulate adult use models we see in many states today. Early medical cannabis laws were radically different from the tightly regulated programs we know now. Patients often relied on home growers. There was no product testing, no seed to sale tracking, and certainly none of the packaging and labeling standards we see today. But over time, these programs morphed into more formal systems centered around what many call the three-pillar approach: age gating, testing requirements, and standardized labeling. Cannabis testing, at least as we now know it, really took shape after Colorado and Washington created an adult use program in 2012. By the time Colorado's market opened in January 2014, the state required mandatory testing for potency and contaminants. That model quickly became the blueprint for other states. So, in the grand scheme of things, cannabis testing and labeling requirements are only about a decade old. Even as states built out these complex systems, none of them were technically in compliance with federal law. Under the Controlled Substances Act, the entire cannabis plant was long classified as a Schedule 1 substance, defined as having no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. For context, in case you didn't know, alcohol and tobacco are both descheduled. In other words, they are not controlled substances. That Schedule 1 status for cannabis has shifted in recent years, not through broad reforms, but through a technical distinction, dividing cannabis into federally legal hemp and still scheduled marijuana, despite both coming from the same plants. And if you're not watching the episode right now and you might be listening, each time I say hemp or marijuana, I'm saying it in air quotes because those are just legal terms. And we'll get back into that in a little bit. That change started with the 2014 Farm Bill, which created a framework for industrial hemp. The real shift came in 2018 when Congress removed the industrial label and rewrote the definition of hemp to include the cannabis plant and all of its parts, seeds, extracts, cannabinoids, you name it, so long as it contains no more than 0.3% of Delta 9 THC by dry weight. That created an entirely new legal category of cannabis, one that was no longer scheduled under federal law. So I'm about to display the Farm Bill on my screen right now. Here's the Farm Bill. And if you scroll to the very bottom of the Farm Bill, the very last page, you can see conforming changes to the Controlled Substances Act. And what you're looking at here is the section of the Farm Bill that made it official. Hemp is no longer considered marijuana under federal law, and THC from hemp is no longer a Schedule 1 substance. This is the legal carve out that opened up the door for hemp derived products to be sold nationwide. So here you can see conforming changes to the Controlled Substances Act. The term marijuana does not include hemp, and it acknowledges that THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is Schedule 1, except for the THC in hemp. So again, this is how the Farm Bill partially descheduled cannabis. And by partially descheduled, I mean this. The 2018 Farm Bill created a new legal term of art, hemp, which wasn't based in botanical science, but instead defined the legal status of cannabis by its Delta 9 THC content. Under this new definition, hemp is any part of the cannabis plant that contains no more than 0.3% Delta 9 THC by dry weight. Anything above that threshold is legally defined as marijuana, even though both fall under the same plant genus and species, Cannabis sativa. This line in the sand is entirely legal, not scientific. In fact, the cannabis plant doesn't naturally produce much Delta 9 THC at all. Among other cannabinoids, the cannabis plant produces THCA, a non-psychoactive cannabinoid that converts to Delta 9 THC when heated. That's why we smoke or vape cannabis. And it's also why, if you've ever baked edibles at home, you've had to heat the weed in your oven first through a process called decarboxylation to activate the psychoactive effects. Now, here's where things get even more tangled. While the Farm Bill legalized the cultivation of hemp, it didn't technically regulate the finished products made from it, like gummies, beverages, vapes, or even the smokable flower. The law only covers how the plant is grown, not how it's processed or sold. And this is pretty well normal for the Farm Bill. Just like the Farm Bill might regulate how corn is grown, it doesn't regulate how it ends up in your cereal box because that's the job of the FDA. But the FDA to date has largely refused to regulate cannabis-derived products, even though it's arguably their role. That regulatory gap has led to a booming market of cannabis products like gummies, beverages, and more, and industry groups have formally asked the FDA to step in. Here's an example of just that.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify before your committee today. Mr. Chairman, I'm especially grateful for your decades-long leadership on behalf of Kentucky hemp farmers. You and I started on this journey in 2012 and worked across the aisle to secure hemp's legalization in the bluegrass state. Indeed, hemp's policy success has always been a bipartisan hallmark. And it's no wonder. Hemp products are made in the USA, harvested from crops grown by American farmers, manufactured by innovative U.S. entrepreneurs, and sold by small businesses dotting the nation. Unfortunately, the U.S. hemp industry continues to encounter avoidable bureaucratic headwinds in the marketplace. And this turmoil is due in large part to statements, actions, and indecisions of the FDA. When Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill, it explicitly legalized the sale of hemp and its derivatives such as CBD. But just a few hours after the Farm Bill was signed into law, the FDA reasserted its opinion that it was illegal to market CBD as a dietary supplement. We've watched in bewilderment as FDA has jerked back and forth with contradictory opinions. First, the agency affirmed its ability to regulate CBD under current law. But then FDA stalled, even ignoring congressional appropriations report directives to take expedited action. Finally, in 2023, the agency stated that it cannot regulate CBD under existing regulatory pathways, essentially punting responsibility to Congress. This regulatory uncertainty resulted in a collapse of the CBD market, as demonstrated on this chart behind me, denying economic opportunity that was promised to farmers. The FDA's inaction doesn't just threaten CBD. A new industry focused on the adult market has emerged to meet consumer demand for hemp-derived cannabinoids like Delta-8 and Delta-9 THC. These products provide plant-based options for adults seeking functional health and wellness benefits. Furthermore, a promising new hemp beverage industry has soared into popularity, meeting adult consumer demand for non-alcoholic options through domestic inputs from our farmers. The only upward line on this chart represents the price of hemp flower, which recovered when it started being widely used for adult products, offering a lifeline to U.S. farmers. Unfortunately, lack of uniform quality control standards for hemp products at the federal level has forced responsible farmers and small business owners to compete against unscrupulous actors who generate headlines by distributing poorly manufactured products that are sometimes inappropriately marketed to children. A political backlash has ensued. Language was added into the 2024 House Farm Bill that purported to crack down on the bad actors. Unfortunately, the language went much farther. It would have federally banned 90 to 95% of the hemp product marketplace, including most non-intoxicating CBD products and animal feed, which offers great promise to farmers, while undermining a decade of progress for hemp fiber production. I want to be very clear. The hemp industry is united behind an appropriate response to these challenges. Robust regulation of hemp products, not misguided prohibition. We support an approach that includes the following four pillars: restrict youth access, increase quality control standards, standardized labeling, and standardized packaging. FDA could act today on applying this four-pillar approach to hemp products. We are hopeful that new leadership of the FDA will reverse the past course of inaction and take deliberate steps to robustly regulate hemp. This approach is precisely in line with the new administration's focus on providing adult consumers the freedom to make their own healthcare choices with holistic solutions that are grown on American farms. If laws must be changed, we urge Congress to act now. There are two viable pathways. First, we hope we'll consider Senator Ron Wyden's effort in the last Congress, S-5243, that would ensure that the FDA regulates applying the four-pillar approach. A parallel effort could be to invest more authority in the states to properly regulate their own markets. In the absence of federal regulation, many states, like our Kentucky home, Mr. Chairman, have filled the policy void by developing new laws and regulations that balance market access with consumer safety. We urge you to implement a federal framework that authorizes the sale of hemp products and develops uniform standards for labeling, packaging, and testing, while allowing states flexibility on more complex issues. In the meantime, we've taken the additional step of establishing the U.S. Hemp Authority, the industry's self-regulating organization, which sets rigorous standards for safety, quality, and transparency across the supply chain. The hemp industry may be unique in that we are coming to Congress to ask, please regulate us. Thank you for your consideration.
In case you're completely lost at this point, the graphic I'm displaying now might help. It's a visual from comic artist Brian Box Brown, and I think it does a great job illustrating how the language of the 2018 Farm Bill has been interpreted and what it's come to mean in practice for those who are selling these cannabis-infused products. So, As you can see, this gummy contains mostly cornstarch, sugar, gelatin, and CBD, but just 0.3% of this gummy is THC, which means that this gummy is hemp. Another example to give you is this drink, for example. It's got 50 milligrams of THC in it, and that 50 milligrams is still just 0.3% of everything that's within this drink. And so while some of you might be saying, gosh, that's a pretty high dose for a drink. Yeah, maybe to some, but it's still under that 0.3%, which means that for all intents and purposes, it's hemp. Once again, this graphic that I just displayed is from Brian Box Brown. You can find his work at boxbrown.com. So I'm going to quickly recap because I know this all can get really confusing. Under federal law, we now have two legal definitions for cannabis: marijuana and hemp. The dividing line, a single number. If the cannabis plant or the cannabis product contains more than that 0.3% Delta-9 THC, it's Schedule 1 marijuana. And if it contains less than that 0.3%, then it's descheduled hemp. That's it. It's not a different species or even a different type of plant. Both fall under the same genus, cannabis. And if you remember from junior high biology, all living organisms are classified by genus and species, a concept called binomial nomenclature. That's how my science teacher, Miss Miller, used to say it. Humans, for example, are Homo sapiens, Homo being the genus, sapiens being the species. And in this case, both hemp and marijuana are Cannabis sativa, which is the genus and species for the plant we know and love. The difference between them is purely legal, not scientific. It's arbitrary, inconsistent with how science works, and this is why you might be feeling a little bit confused right now. So, in 2019, Illinois became the first state to legalize and tax marijuana through the legislative process. One of the stated goals was social equity, which was supposed to repair the harm done by cannabis criminalization. But instead of opening the market, lawmakers chose to limit the number of business licenses, or as Governor Pritzker put it,
work. But remember, one of the reasons that that we have had some challenges has been because we've been so focused on equity. Now, what I mean to say is, I know that there are people who write about this, that there are other states that have opened up the number of licenses to hundreds and hundreds of licensees, and they have more dispensaries open than we do. But the reality is that we've limited the number of licensees in part because we wanted to make sure that the social equity licensees had a fair shot in the industry and they weren't just edged out to the very end and by having too many dispensaries in the market so that people can't make money, entrepreneurs who open places like Ivy Hall. So
industry leaders like Cresco Labs CEO Charlie Bachtell has described Illinois as creating Cannabis Generation 2. A tightly controlled, limited access system for the cultivation and sale of cannabis.
It was one of the very unique components of the Illinois bill is we're going to have the first limited license adult use program in the country. And it was built on the back of the medical program. And the medical program really did change the way that cannabis was done in the US, right? Illinois created Generation 2. Which is highly regulated, compliance-focused, and limited licenses. And so
proponents of limited licensing often point to states like Michigan, Oklahoma, and Oregon as cautionary tales, arguing that issuing too many licenses led to falling prices. While that drop was great for consumers, it created serious competition, which again is great for consumers. But if you're trying to plant your stake in the cannabis business, serious competition can make things hard. The former executive director of the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, Steve Marks, shared his perspective on this issue.
Do you look back at it and think maybe we should have put some caps on production or on the licenses?
My job's not to second guess that. I'm just the administrator. But if you're asking me, I don't think so. Everyone just wanted to be the first in, to have their stake in it, and they were willing to take the risk to be a part of that market. So I don't think that's necessarily bad. And in a control market, they'd be left out. They'd never get that chance.
You think all this cheap product would at least be great for the people selling weed. But the same free market system that's given Oregon a ton of growers has also flooded the state with a ton of dispensaries.
Saturation is everywhere. It's on all license holders. Now we have 550 stores. in the state of Oregon. So that's more dispensaries than Starbucks and McDonald's combined in the state of Oregon, just to give you a perspective of what that might look like.
Of course, there's one group of people who would never complain about weed market competition. People who like cheap weed.
I just bought a pre-rolled pack of joints for $16, and that is like something I would have never dreamed of.
It's great. I don't think about the expense anymore, which is super awesome, you know?
Steve joined me on the show in the past to talk about that topic and more. You can find my full conversation with Steve Marks, linked in the show notes. So, back to Illinois. While the state of Illinois and others like it opened the door for some to legally grow and sell marijuana, it kept the old criminal penalties in place for anyone who sells marijuana outside of the licensed system. So, the same enforcement mechanisms that harmed communities for decades are still on the books and enforced today, which brings us to the central tension, I think, of today's episode. The 2018 Farm Bill created a descheduled market for cannabis that exists outside of these limited licensed systems. And in states like Illinois, that has sparked outrage among operators in the state marijuana program who feel undercut by hemp products that, in their view, are truly identical, but unburdened by the same rules, costs, and restrictions.
But if in fact that is, you're able to produce intoxicating products from what is technically a hemp plant, then I think it challenges existing cannabis state laws and programs that have been put in place, because you could have the same product being sold across the street at an unlicensed, unregulated, traditional retail storefront. This industry would not be able to compete with that. Full stop. You can't have an industry that has to comply with licensing requirements, the cost of licensing, the cost of regulatory compliance, add on top of that X% excise tax, add on top of that we're deemed federally illegal from the federal government's perspective as a Schedule 1 that puts 280E, IRC 280E on top of us. You can't have, that industry can't possibly compete with an identical product, truly identical, being sold at a store that doesn't have to pay for a state license, doesn't have to comply with state regulatory structures and the cost of those, doesn't have to pay that excise tax, can take credit cards, can raise capital, can go public on US exchanges, doesn't have 280E,
can file copyrights and stuff.
Absolutely. So one way or another, these
businesses, from what I understand, do have to get business licenses. But I think what Charlie's point, and that was Charlie Bachtel, the CEO of Cresco Labs, I think Charlie's point is that they haven't had to pay for a state marijuana license. Here's another perspective of people who feel that they're being undercut by these hemp products, which, again, as Charlie said, are truly identical, but are unburdened by the same rules, costs, and restrictions.
It's just far easier to continue down the path or to take up the path, either way, right? Of the Delta 8 or the other intoxicating cannabinoid products, because you can sell them over the internet, because you don't have all of that security expense. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars of security in the production facilities. I mean, literally, I'm not exaggerating. We have to maintain 90 days of video on all these cameras, 100+ cameras, 90 days of video in the cloud. Do you understand what that costs? That bandwidth costs thousands and thousands of dollars a month. Right. They have none of that. So the problem with the question you raised is, why don't we reduce it for everybody? And I don't disagree. That would be great. But that's going to take something at the federal level, because the things that are being imposed on us are to comply with the mandate of the Cole Memo.
And by the way, I didn't issue any mandates. In case you didn't know, the show is called the Cole Memo because in the Obama era, during Obama's presidency, there was a memorandum issued that basically said, hey, I know states are creating these adult use programs, and in order to avoid enforcement from federal law, you must abide by the strictures of the Cole Memo. So that's what they were referring to. The heart of today's debate stems from the two legal definitions created by the 2018 Farm Bill and how they've disrupted the idea that cannabis sales should only happen in tightly controlled markets. Before that bill passed, unless your state had a specific program in place, no one could legally grow or sell any form of cannabis. But after 2018, anything that met the federal definition of hemp could be grown and sold like any other agricultural commodity, which brings us where we are today, especially in states like Illinois, where we now have 3 distinct pathways for legally acquiring cannabis. You've got medical marijuana, adult use marijuana, and hemp. The first 2, medical and adult use, are Illinois state programs. These products fall under the Schedule 1 framework, even though the state allows operators to use federally legal hemp in infused products. So what did I mean by that? Right now, I'm displaying a long-standing variance that allows hemp and hemp derivatives to be used in medical and adult use cannabis products. Specifically, from what I understand, these hemp and hemp derivatives can be used in infused products. And so, just to give you a few real-world examples, I'm displaying my screen right now, and you can see this product, and you can see the BioTrack label here, and you can see in the ingredients it says hemp-derived extract. Here is also a quote from a person that works with MariMed.
Well, I mean, from an innovation standpoint, we're using hemp-derived cannabinoids in the majority of our products. So we are participating in the hemp-derived marketplace. I would say we're keeping all.
And so that's just a perspective. If you want to check out that full episode, I'll put it in the show notes. Also, there's a lot of talk about Delta 8. Honestly, the first place I ever tried Delta 8 was in a dispensary. Here's some pictures of products that were on the menus. Here's a picture of a Delta 8 product that was sold in Illinois dispensaries. You can see the label right here, the BioTrack label. Many of the edibles you'll find on dispensary shelves technically meet the definition of hemp, since most contain less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC by total product weight. Think that graphic that I showed earlier from Box Brown. Some of the flower might also even fall under that threshold.
If you go and buy weed at your medical dispensary locally or at your adult use dispensary, it's probably going to be hemp. The vast majority of the ones that you see in an Illinois dispensary qualify as hemp. They'll be.
So I'm pausing this right now. You can see on the menus here, these are Illinois products. They actually qualify as hemp because they have less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. So
the THCA loophole is really big because that's what the plant makes. So the plant is making hemp. It's not marijuana until you light it on fire.
As you just said, the dispensary carries these products too. I think some people get confused and think that THCA is some like synthetic or like it's sprayed on or.
There's no difference.
And so forgive me for the background music on that. That was a video used to promote a episode that I did with cannabis industry lawyer Tom Howard. So even though these products could qualify as hemp, because these products are sold within the state's cannabis system, they're still classified as marijuana and are subject to the restrictions that come with that Schedule 1 status. In Illinois, marijuana products, whether medical or adult use, can only be sold at the limited number of state dispensaries. Currently, there's no delivery allowed and access is tightly regulated, but hemp is an entirely different story. Because it falls outside the Controlled Substances Act, hemp-derived cannabis products can be sold in liquor stores, grocery stores, bars, restaurants, you name it. They can also be sold online and shipped right to your door. So even though all 3 systems are selling cannabis in some form, they're governed by completely different rules and requirements. Hemp has definitely led to things I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Beyond the fact that you can now legally have cannabis products delivered to your door, there have been moments like the one I'm about to show you. This is footage of a police raid on a smoke shop that was selling cannabis compliant with the Farm Bill. You can see officers taking bags of product outside of the store, and what you're about to see is those same officers returning with those trash bags full of weed and cash, because again, it's federally legal. I never thought I'd see the day where police were forced to give cannabis and the cash back to the seller, but here we are and that's all thanks to hemp. Cannabis advocates from the past would likely see an event like this and view it as a major win for civil liberties. You can see me interview the owner of that shop and review other footage from that event via the link in the show notes. To shift gears for a moment, in October of 2022, President Biden directed the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to expeditiously review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Let's watch the clip.
Marijuana possession offenses. Third, the federal government currently classifies marijuana as a Schedule I substance, the same as heroin and LSD, and more serious than fentanyl. Makes no sense. So I'm asking the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to initiate a process to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law, even as federal law.
So that directive kicked off a formal multi-step administrative process that's still unfolding to this day. In August of 2023, the Department of Health and Human Services completed its scientific and medical review and recommended that marijuana be moved from Schedule I to Schedule III under the Controlled Substances Act. In other words, it would still be a controlled substance. Then, in May of 2024, the Department of Justice, through the Attorney General, issued a proposed rule to formally reschedule marijuana, which triggered a public comment period as required under the federal rulemaking process. That comment period closed on July 22nd, 2024. According to reporting from The Guardian, nearly 43,000 comments were submitted, making it the most feedback the DEA has ever received on a proposed rule change. And despite the proposal being limited to rescheduling, 69% of those comments actually called for full descheduling. In other words, people wanted to remove marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act altogether, like tobacco, alcohol, and now hemp. So before we dive into today's conversations, let's recap where we are. We've partially descheduled the cannabis plant by creating an arbitrary legal category called hemp. That distinction, again, is based entirely on Delta-9 THC levels, not on botanical definitions. And that's the backdrop for today's conversations. When I started this show, I knew cannabis policy would always be part of the conversation, but I didn't expect this issue to become such a flashpoint. And yet, it hasn't let up. Go back to episode 3 and you'll hear the first time I hosted a debate between people on both sides of this issue in Illinois. Since then, the tension has only grown, but the argument has stayed relatively consistent. I say relatively because the goalposts have shifted a bit. When this debate first started, those pushing for a ban on hemp often argued that it was fundamentally different from marijuana, claiming it was dangerous and inauthentic. But as we've now covered, most people understand that the only real difference between these products is a legal distinction, one that's completely arbitrary. This issue has created deep frustration within the marijuana industry, especially among those who bought into a system that was designed to limit participation by design. An analogy that comes up a lot with regard to this topic is Uber versus taxis. In many cities, becoming a taxi driver meant going through the long and expensive process of acquiring a medallion, a limited license that allowed you to legally pick up passengers. These medallions were expensive, tightly regulated, and often came with recurring licensing fees, which might sound familiar. When Uber entered the scene, drivers didn't need a medallion. All they had to do was pass a background check, sign up for the app, and agree to share a portion of their fares. Maybe there's a few other things you have to do. I'm not an Uber driver, so I'm not sure. But in either case, taxi drivers saw this as unfair. They felt like Uber drivers were bypassing the rules and cutting into their business, offering essentially the same service, but without the same costs or constraints. And while this might seem like apples to oranges because giving someone a ride was never highly criminalized, the convenience of hailing a car from your phone created real competition for what you might call the traditional taxi system. In response, taxi companies and medallion holders in many cities lobbied to ban or restrict Uber altogether. And it seems like the same dynamic is playing out in cannabis. Again, it's now widely acknowledged that many hemp-derived products are truly identical to those sold in dispensaries, but they're subject to completely different rules. Marijuana operators argue that hemp sellers are sidestepping the regulatory burdens they had to comply with. Like the tension between taxi drivers and Uber, the debate here is often framed around fairness and uneven regulation. But with cannabis, there's an added dimension: the risk of criminal penalties for those operating outside of the state system. And with hemp, at least for now, hemp operators have been able to avoid these criminal penalties. I want to be very clear here, and I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. Not all marijuana operators seem upset about the opportunities that have come with hemp. In fact, several well known cannabis brands you might recognize, like Green Thumb Industries, Curaleaf, Wana, Wild, Cookies, and others, are actively selling hemp derived products. Some have even leaned into it as a new revenue stream, taking advantage of the flexibility that comes with operating outside of a state marijuana system. A recent article came out on this very topic, and that's ultimately what inspired today's conversations. Not long after reading the article, I saw a few unread messages in my inbox from Tom, the owner of the Chicago Cannabis Company. His response to the article and his perspective more broadly is one of the featured conversations in today's episodes. In past episodes, I've made a point to feature perspectives from both sides of this ongoing debate between hemp and marijuana, and that remains the case here. I've reached out to Achille Parnell, who has joined the show before, and invited him to weigh in. You can find links in the show notes to a few of the previous conversations Achille has joined me for in case you'd like to revisit those. Achille will be joining me for a conversation after my conversation with Tom. I'm also working on getting in touch with Misha Pike, who was also mentioned in this article that inspired today's episode, to offer the same opportunity should they want to share their perspective. Now, I've not been able to make contact with them just yet, but I'm saving space for them should they choose to come onto the show. Like I told you, I had a lot to say, and I've got just a little bit more to say before I send you into our conversations. I want to acknowledge that I've been openly critical of how Illinois has chosen to tax and regulate cannabis. At a fundamental level, I oppose any system that limits the number of licenses a state can issue. I think that kind of cap is best left to local governments, just like we already do with zoning or limits on any other type of business, and I don't know why cannabis should be any different. In my view, it shouldn't be the state's role to decide how many cannabis businesses can exist across the board. I'm also strongly opposed to the confidentiality provisions baked into the Illinois cannabis law. There's little to no transparency when it comes to ownership data. According to the Chicago Tribune, state law bars the release of nearly all of the information that applicants must submit to obtain lucrative licenses to grow or sell marijuana. As a result, the public can't access records that could reveal questionable funding sources or ties to problematic individuals. And this kind of secrecy has already caused issues in other state-regulated industries like gambling, where revelations of organized crime ties triggered public concern and political fallout. Even before legalization passed, concerns about transparency were on the table. The bill's sponsors, Senator Heather Staines and Representative Kelly Cassidy, publicly vowed to make ownership data fully accessible. But when the bill ultimately passed, it included a confidentiality provision that remains in effect today. That same lack of transparency extends to cannabis product recalls. As reported by the Chicago Sun-Times, current rules allow problems to be handled behind closed doors through administrative consent orders, classified as confidential and shielded from public release. I'll have a link to the episode I've done with investigators from the Chicago Sun-Times on that subject and more. But the issue I'm perhaps most passionate about is ending the use of the criminal law as the primary enforcement mechanism for cannabis in Illinois. In my view, if social equity is truly about repairing the harms caused by the war on drugs, then that repair must include ending all policies rooted in the drug war itself, especially those still being used to criminalize cannabis. Limits on the purchase, possession, and sale of cannabis, for example, are holdovers from the Illinois Cannabis Control Act of 1978, yet they remain embedded in the current system. Depending on where you stand, you might not fully agree with how I approach this topic. If you're in the marijuana space, you might hear my take and think I'm leaning too far in one direction. If you're in the hemp space, you might wish I pushed harder in another. And I've even had guests on the show who don't think cannabis should be legal at all, whether we're talking about hemp or marijuana. And my hope is that by acknowledging all of this up front, And through the conversations featured in this episode, you'll see that I'm genuinely trying to be as even-handed as possible by creating a space for a range of perspectives in this ongoing conversation. I mentioned this later in the episode, but I just wanted to make it clear. What fascinates me most about this moment is that for the first time in modern history, we're seeing certain cannabis products be treated as fully descheduled commodities. That means they can be bought, sold, shipped, and possessed across state lines without the restrictions that normally come with being listed on the Controlled Substances Act. And I say all of this as a consumer with no aspirations to get involved in the business. I'm just someone who's purchased cannabis through multiple state regulated programs, and honestly, I've never felt more free in my access to the plant than when I've bought some of these hemp derived products, because in states like Illinois, access is so tightly restricted. And other states do offer more flexibility, but the systems still feel kind of bizarre. Take Michigan, for example. I can buy as much product as my heart desires, but the dispensary has to split my purchases into multiple transactions in order to stay compliant. So it's technically legal, but in so many ways, the process of purchasing cannabis feels like regulatory theater. And I can't think of another legal product that's treated this way. I believe there are issues with both the hemp and marijuana sides of this industry, and I've put together a policy paper aimed at addressing those. I'll link it in the show notes. It's something I've discussed with a former cannabis regulator and policymaker, and I'll link that episode that I'm referring to in the show notes as well. And it's a framework that state regulators here in Illinois have even reached out to me about, expressing support for the direction that I'm recommending. So finally, I think it's important to be clear about the lens I'm bringing to this episode. I don't have a preference for hemp over marijuana or vice versa. I just have a preference for open access to the cannabis plant. I know people on both sides of this issue could take that stance personally, but really, none of this is meant as a personal critique. I'm just trying to be transparent about what I value, and what I value is access. That means access for consumers and for entrepreneurs. Even though I have no interest in entering the industry myself, I believe consumers benefit when more people are allowed to participate. And we should be able to vote with our dollars, but we can't legally do that until everyone's allowed to be on the ballot. So, with all of that said, thank you for being patient as I set the stage. We're going to kick things off with a conversation featuring Tom from Chicago Cannabis Company. After that, I'll be joined by Akili Parnell, who shares his experience working within the Illinois State program, and I'll also give him a chance to respond to some of the points Tom raised during his segment of the episode. I'm also excited to share that I've floated the idea of a joint conversation between Tom and Akili, and they've both tentatively agreed to take part. So now it's just a matter of finding a time that works for all of us. So with all of that said, thank you for being patient with me during this intro, and enjoy these conversations that I had with Tom and Akili. Here they are. Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Cole Memo. Today will definitely be a good one. I think it'll be interesting. Before we get into it, I'll just share, and I'll have this link in the show notes as well. I recently saw this article on the Tribe. The headline is "Social Equity Weed Entrepreneurs Speak Out Against Unregulated Hemp Undercutting Their Business." And it's an interesting read. We'll probably talk about a few different things, but I specifically saw mention of Chicago Cannabis Company in this article, and actually checked my inbox and saw that the person that runs Chicago Cannabis Company reached out to me, and I thought, well, what better way to have this conversation than with them? So, well, without further ado, let's just get into it. It's time for another episode of
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo. The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo is what allows this whole thing to go on.
I mean, you have to respect the memo.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're listening and watching The Cole Memo.
All right. Yeah, let's do it. Tom, welcome to the show. Tom from Chicago Cannabis Company. How's it going, man?
What's good? I like your new intro, by the way. It's very it's very on point. The Cole Memo. It's great. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was kind of fun to throw that together. And, you know, some people are always like, did you name the show the Cole Memo just because your name is Cole? No. And I feel like that intro does a pretty good service. You know, it's a real thing, folks. We won't get into it right now. Just Google it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tom, before we talk about the article and everything, you want to give yourself maybe a brief intro? Anything I didn't cover?
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Tom. I'm from Chicago Cannabis Company. I started the company back in 2018. Right now we have 2 shops, one in Lincoln Park, one in North Center, and we're about to open one more in Wrigleyville. So stay tuned on details for that.
Exciting. That's cool. Well, why don't we get right into it? What did you think when you saw this article come out? I want to just give you the floor before I ask any questions.
Word. I mean, I'm sure not many people read this or have had a chance to read it, but basically, this group has been trying to ban hemp for the past 2 years in Illinois. So I'm not really surprised by this article. You know, it's a tactic they've already been doing. So actually, the same group that has been calling for more hemp regulations is the same group that came down to City Hall to protest against hemp regulations proposed by the city of Chicago. So they don't actually want hemp regulations. They want to ban hemp. They want to ban businesses like mine and fold it all into Schedule 1 dispensaries. That's their plan. I mean, they say it loud and clear, like they want to ban it. They want to scoop it all up for themselves. And they're not going to do anything different than what we're doing. They're going to source the same stuff. They're going to sell it at their dispensaries, and they're going to charge the customers more money for it. So they're slamming the products that they are also wanting to sell, but at their dispensaries, right? So which is like kind of sad, because cannabis culture is all about like sharing, gifting, you know, hooking your homies up, and this just reads like straight up corporate greed. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is corporate greed on display. And it's antithetical to cannabis culture, I think. So, you know, this lady that was also mentioned in the article, you know, she opened her dispensary across from CBD Kratom, which was already there. So they knew it was there when they were opening up their dispensary. Now they're complaining about it being there. So that doesn't add up. In the article, the person who is opening up UMI dispensary in Lincoln Park said that they don't like that I have the weed leaf displayed in my window. And they're like a previous board member of Chicago Normal, or maybe a current board member. It's hard to tell because the website doesn't have any info about who's actually running the organization anymore. So I have no idea. But it's ironic that like somebody who wants to supposedly normalize weed or cannabis, whatever, has an issue with me being able to display a weed leaf in my window, right? Like, that doesn't add up. So basically the whole premise is, oh, these shops are undercutting our ability, you know, they're undercutting us and yada, yada, yada. They're cheaper and whatnot. So I actually went and did a price comparison, and actually our prices are more or less the same. Actually, some of our products are priced higher because of the excessive discounting at these dispensaries. So for example, this lady was saying that she's struggling. Well, it's like the first day she's opening up her dispensary. How is she already struggling? You know, and then I looked at her pricing and everything's 50% off. So they're selling it at the price point that they're getting it. I didn't make that decision for them. That's their decision. So I think folding federally legal hemp into Schedule 1 dispensaries is actually unfair and unequitable, because I have a family, I have employees, I have a business, I have stuff at risk. Their situation's not unique. So why should I get banned for having a legal business just because they want to scoop it up all for themselves, right? So I think that's unfair. So I think the whole premise is unfair. I think there's no way to prove that their customers are somehow going to hemp dispensaries instead. Customers have a lot of different options nowadays. You can shop online, you can shop from other states, you can shop at other hemp businesses, you can shop at other dispensaries opening up. So if your sales are down, it's because customers have more options. And also there's an economic downturn. So everybody's sales are down. You can't blame it all on hemp. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of already, one of my questions that I was going to ask is, like you said, these folks in this article are not alone in saying this. Some licensed dispensary owners say your store and others like it are undercutting their businesses and that hemp is unfair.
Well, it's easy to undercut somebody who's selling a 1 gram cart for $75. Like, you know,
yeah.
Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, the reason their stuff is expensive is because of a simple supply and demand issue. Okay. Like hemp, I can source stuff from, we have more suppliers. I can source stuff from North Carolina. I can source stuff from Minnesota, from Oregon, from Colorado, from Illinois, from Wisconsin. Like, I have options. There's a lot of suppliers. There's more competition. For them, they only have a handful of Illinois suppliers, and that's why stuff is more expensive. It's just market dynamics. That has nothing to do with hemp or anything like that. Plus, they're also allowed to source hemp. So they can source the same stuff and sell it at the dispensary already. So I don't know why they're complaining about being undercut. If you're overcharging your customers, that seems like a problem with your business model, not everybody else.
Well, was it really hard to start your hemp business? Like, is anything preventing them from starting one?
Well, I can tell you right now, it took a long time to get to where we're at. Like, we bootstrapped the entire company, right? Like, we didn't go looking for investors. We didn't get a bunch of cash on hand to open up a multi-million-dollar dispensary. Like, we literally sold product and took that money and reinvested it back into the company and grew the company that way. So it was actually extremely difficult to get to where we're at. It wasn't easy, but yeah, sure. The licensing is slightly easier because it's not as restrictive because it's federally legal. It's not a Schedule 1. It's not considered a Schedule 1 substance. So therefore it is easier. Also, like the whole premise that it's difficult, like for UMI dispensary, like I didn't choose where they're going to open. They were trying to they wanted to open across the street from a park where kids play. Like, it should be difficult to open up a dispensary across from a park where kids play. So I didn't force them to open there. Like, it's difficult to open up a dispensary across the park where kids play because maybe you should have chosen a different location. So yeah, it was difficult because you were, trying to open up a dispensary across from the park where kids play. So maybe you should have chosen a different location and it would have been easier.
Right. Well, I guess my real question is, like if you and I, or even just myself, like if I wanted to open up a dispensary under the CRTA tomorrow, like that's not an option. But you get
yeah, I
what I'm
love how
saying?
everyone's like, just get a license, just get a license. It's like, I've tried to apply for a license and literally the last checkbox is like, have you ever been arrested for weed? And if you haven't, then you can't get a license. So I think at one point I was technically an equity applicant because of like the 5 years living in a DIA. So I did live in a DIA. I don't consider myself an equity applicant. I don't pretend to be an equity applicant, but I was eligible. I'm not eligible anymore because of the time frame. But actually, I don't know if you remember, in 2020, when weed was legalized and they rolled out the program, basically the medical companies who didn't have any social equity requirements were able to get licenses, right? So like they didn't have to qualify. And the qualifying conditions were different. So there was like 3 different ways you could qualify. One way was by hiring the 10 employees from a DIA. Another way was the 5 years out of 10 living in a DIA, and the third one was you had a misdemeanor kind of, you know, on your record. So there was supposed to be 2 phases. I don't know if you remember this, but there were supposed to be 2 phases of applications. So there's supposed to be 2 rounds. So one round completed, and then they actually never did a second round. So if you didn't apply in that first round in 2020, the next round they didn't do. They changed the rules. So the 10 employee requirement was no longer a thing. So it was just the 2 criteria left. And they actually gave out all those licenses meant for the second round, which implied there was going to be a second application process. They gave it all to the first round, you know?
Yeah.
So I think the next chance you had was like in 2023 to apply for another phase of licensing. And at that point, it was harder. And actually, there is no way of knowing who qualified for what criteria anymore because it's all confidential. So like, right. I don't know, some people maybe qualified for the 10 employee thing. And now I don't have that opportunity, you know, and there is no open licensing. So I can't just go and apply. It's closed. You know?
And that was really my question. Like, you know, when you say it's unfair, to me, when I hear that, I think, well, something must be stopping you from getting involved in hemp, right? But it seems like nothing is stopping anyone from getting involved in hemp. But like you just said, the same can't be said about the marijuana industry.
No,
to use the
I would have to go find somebody who qualifies for social equity, give them 51% of my idea, and then apply and hope that they don't screw me over.
But back to your point though, there's no applicant. You can't apply anymore because they're not issuing any more licenses.
No, I can't apply. I can try to buy a license for $2 million.
Right. That's all you can do. And so
Yeah.
to say that it's unfair, you see companies like Curaleaf, they just opened up a hemp shop in Florida recently. GTI, they're selling hemp products, a lot of the products that they sell in the dispensary. And again, it seems hasty, for lack of better words, to say that this is unfair, because I would say, at least with hemp, it seems like there's nothing more fair than hemp. There's no, you know, you just got to get, you can, there's nothing stopping you.
Yeah. That's
Right.
why there's an argument that, like, okay, we were all criticizing the CRTA for a long time about not being equitable, right? And then all of a sudden it turned equitable because hemp's now in the picture, and hemp's like undermining social equity, where it's like, well, I know a lot of people who got their foot in the door with hemp, and I think they're more social equity applicants than the CRTA, some of the CRTA holders, you know? Plus, like, they're not forced to sell the big MSO brands. Like, if you open up a social equity dispensary, you're still going to be selling like the big name brands, and those are the true winners in all of this, because they get a massive market share and no one else can enter the market. So you want the cheapest products, go with the biggest brands.
Yeah. What's one thing that you think most people misunderstand about your business, or even just the broader hemp industry?
I think a lot of people see it as like a bootleg operation, which, like, maybe in 2018, 2019, it kind of was. But now hemp is a more mature industry than these licensed Schedule 1 like operations. It's a more mature market. There's more suppliers, more testing facilities, more retailers, more brands. And it's just a bigger market. There's also like GMP certifications. Like, our suppliers are GMP certified. There is no GMP certification for marijuana, you know? So a lot of people think like, oh, it's like unregulated and whatever. And it's like, well, self-regulation has a lot to do with it, you know? Like, regulation isn't a silver bullet, because what's one of the most regulated industries you can think of? Pharmaceuticals, right? Okay, so the FDA allowed opioid manufacturers to cause an epidemic and kill hundreds of thousands of people, and that was like extremely regulated. So regulation, like, nobody's regulating on a day-to-day. Like, that's up to you, you know? So people think like, oh, regulation. Well, like a lot of these products are tested. Like they do come from reliable suppliers. And a lot of these like anti-hemp organizations, they're just taking like the worst examples out of the industry and like applying it to like the entire thing. You know what I mean? Like they're literally taking illegal street products and saying, oh, this is hemp. It's like, no, this isn't hemp. Like these aren't hemp brands. They're taking like a prohibitionist playbook, you know, just taking the worst case scenario and just blanket applying it to the entire industry. And that's unfair.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I was thinking of, and I'd have to find a picture of it, but I remember like JB Pritzker has held up packaging of candy, and like you said, that is already illegal. Like companies like Mars Wrigley,
literally nobody sells that. No legitimate retailers are selling those products. Like those products are sold out of like some dude's car that pulls up.
Right, but even if they are, they're already illegal. And Mars Wrigley has sued people for what's called copyright infringement. It shouldn't be like a very foreign concept for people, but apparently it is, because you see them using these examples. They'll say, well, a kid could accidentally buy these Doritos. And it's like, first of all, the Doritos cost like, I don't know. I don't reckon they cost $3 like an actual bag of Doritos does. Like usually they're like 20 to 30 bucks if it's an edible product. Again, not that I think a product like that should exist anyways, but I'm just saying, like, I don't think a kid's going to say, whoops, I just spent $30 on a bag of chips. Like it just,
I think it has more to do with like, the parent buys it and like the kid mistakes it. Like I don't think the kid's buying it. It's just a matter of like, oh, the kid might mistake it when it's at home. You know what I mean? So like actually like our stuff, we have a giant weed logo like on the front. You can't mistake this. Like this is a weed product. Everyone knows what it's going to make you feel like. And actually it's more confusing not having the weed leaf on a weed product, frankly. Like a lot of the brands I'm seeing, that they don't look anything like a weed product, and it's confusing. I could pick that up and not know it's a weed product, you know, unless I read the back.
Right. There are
like at least ours has a giant weed leaf in the front, so you know that it's a weed product.
Yeah, and I mean, if there were, you know, if that was the argument, like you said, that people are worried about kids accidentally getting those because a parent brought it home. Here's the picture that I was gonna display a moment ago. I'll put it on screen. This picture with Governor Pritzker and the two nerds packages. Like you say, if that's the concern, which I actually haven't heard it put that way.
Those nerds are like notoriously like the you know, underground market stuff. Like this isn't a hemp product, straight up.
Yeah. Well, and again, I guess the point I was gonna make is like right here.
That looks like a dispensary product to me. They're selling candy.
I will confirm to you that one of these two are a dispensary product, and at a glance, I'm not.
Yeah, what's the next phase of this craziness? Like ban all candy from dispensaries? Like what are you going to be stuck with selling?
And that's what I wonder, if they realize what they're doing. They're kind of like cutting off their nose to spite their face when they make arguments like these. Like I think there should be infused.
You know
candies.
what? They're going to be completely fine. This is all just like greed and this kind of scarcity mindset that there's somehow not enough weed customers. Like, okay, sorry, you're going to make $4 million instead of $5 million, you know. Like they're gonna be just fine. They basically have a license and an exclusive industry that guarantees them customers, and like they're just pissed off because somebody else is doing a better job and offering a better product, you know. And they're using like unregulated, and they go as far as like just calling it straight up illegal, which is like not the case at all. They use it all as an excuse, but really they just want they want it all for themselves. Like that's, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, they want that limited licensed market. You know, I googled your name and I found these results. It looks like you have proposed your own ordinances. and this one is specifically talking about the subject that we're talking about right now, where you're saying, I mean, it literally says your name right here. This
Yeah,
is
I know.
in
Yeah.
Chicago, and you've proposed a prohibition on the sale of retail hemp products to
Yeah.
persons under 21 years of age. Seems like you are asking for regulations. 'Cause you're
Yeah,
proposing them
I was actually
yourself.
I was the first person to submit a hemp ordinance in Chicago. It was at the end of last year, and this is literally as simple as the city of Chicago passing an ordinance that says hemp retailers can't sell to minors. Like that's literally how simple it is. And I just wanted to show that by submitting that ordinance, to show that if you want to regulate it and prevent retailers from selling to minors, which all of them are, like, no legitimate retailer is not carding. You know what I mean? So
You're saying all of them are
yes,
asking for
like
ID.
I think the city should go to all these retailers that they're supposedly trying to ban and actually try to buy something, and they will get carded. Like, tobacco shops already card; they're used to carding. So why do you think they're not going to card for this product? You know?
Yeah, maybe it's just an anecdote, but when I was under 18, I could never get into a smoke shop without being stopped and like, do you have an ID?
Yeah, you go to Benny's, they check your ID. So
Yeah. So you've kind of talked about your stance on the push to limit intoxicating products, cannabis products, to licensed dispensaries only. I mean, any other thoughts? Just like, you know, what do you think when you see people pushing for these bans? Like, it's kind of crazy, right?
I mean, I understand why they're doing it, right? Like, they paid a lot of money to what they thought was an exclusive market. But I was telling people about the hemp opportunity since I saw it. I was like, don't sleep on hemp. Like, hemp's gonna be a big market. And like, not a lot of people listen to me. You know, I think I went to like several events and like even like Chicago normal meetings, and I was like, hey, like, why don't you guys look into hemp? Because you can do a lot with it. You can grow it legally, etc., extract cannabinoids, whatever. And like, everyone was just like super gun-ho about getting a license, right? And then they got their license and they sold their license because it's actually extremely difficult to get operational in this industry. And I think that's like the real disconnect, is that like, it's all supposed to be about social equity, but it just costs so much money to like start a business in Illinois, you know, that like, I think that's like kind of what's surprising to me, is that our shop over in Lincoln Park, which like this article was about, we opened it in 2022. UMI got approved in like 2023. So they already knew we were there. And our shop's like 900 square feet. It's a tiny shop. Like, we're not like a big player by any means. They opened up a 5,000 square foot dispensary down the street. So I think I'm the one that should be worried about my customers going over there to their nice swanky dispensary that they spend a bunch of money on, right? Like, why are they worried about little old me like selling some hemp products? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I've had Akili on the show, who's mentioned in this article. I've had Chicago Normal on the show. Interestingly, I was just scrolling their Instagram and saw they've got this post from 2021 where they teach people how to start a hemp business.
Well, I'm sure they're not doing that now.
Yeah, I was gonna say the times have changed, maybe. But okay, what do you think? Okay, so you said the age gate. In other words, 21 plus. What do you think? You know, because it seems like you're open to the idea of adding more structure. What do you think would satisfy any concerns that people may have about these hemp products? Like anything else besides a 21 plus?
I mean,
Like I know there are proposals, for example, from a few different organizations. I've seen a few different bills floating in Illinois where they're saying mandatory testing, mandatory truth and labeling. Like, do you think those are some things that are agreeable?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of it is already happening because the industry self-regulates, right? So like all of the products I get come with COAs. They're tested for compliance. So sure, you can require it, and it's not going to change a whole lot because the stuff's already tested. So sure, maybe like it will eliminate some products that are like super sketchy somewhere, but like those people don't care about the regulations anyway. So like, you know what I mean? Like you can try to regulate, but like, what are you gonna do? Like go to every single shop and test every single product? Like they're not even doing that at the dispensaries. So like what?
What I do think is
like I bought so much weed in my life, like before it was legalized, and not once did I like think, oh no, maybe I should like ask for a COA from my dealer.
Right.
Like the whole premise was like, oh, no one's ever died from weed. So it was like not tested before. And all of a sudden, like everybody like makes it a pharmaceutical grade product. Try to make it out to be like this pharma grade product to the degree that it just becomes like bunk shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
it is interesting. I recently posted a poll because you can request COAs from the dispensary, and I'll try to display the poll here in a second. But
guarantee you nobody's asking.
No,
because customers don't care. They care about how the product makes them feel, right? Honestly, they don't even care that you're social equity. No offense. Like the customers don't know. They don't know about this stuff. They don't know about social equity, whatever. Like a lot of them just want to come to your dispensary, get a good deal, and go have a good time. Like
one thing I will say about like if we mandated truth in labeling and mandated testing, like I do think it would be nice if because we already do have mechanisms. Oh, I found the poll that I posted. You can see. I'll put it on my screen right now. Most people say I've never asked, and the second most response is I didn't even know you could ask or what a COA is.
That's because most people aren't super neurotic when it comes to weed consumption, right? It's like imagine going to Starbucks and being like, yo, barista, can I get a pesticide report for these coffee beans imported from God knows where? That like, what standards do they have? You know what I mean? It's like, do you go to the grocery store and ask for like pesticide residue analysis on your lettuce before you buy it? Or like you go and buy a box of strawberries, you take it home and it goes moldy the next day. Do you like go back and say, hey, there was like mold on these strawberries, give me my money back and recall the strawberries? Like it's yeah, it's like it's
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm just ranting at this point.
It's okay. Well, I was just gonna say it's funny you brought up recalls. I made this graphic recently, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, these recalls in Michigan," and this is a comment from another person, but it's absolutely accurate. They say, keep in mind that it's not uncommon to see product recalls in Michigan because the state actually puts this info out for the public. The state of Illinois doesn't put out any information on product recalls because they rely cultivators and dispensaries do it themselves. They say, personally, I'd rather have someone named and shamed when stuff like this pops up rather than letting them handle it themselves quietly. And from the Chicago Sun-Times, you can see just a little blip here that says
that's all well and good. This is great and this is fine as long as the regulations are reasonable.
Right. I guess the point I was trying to make is, they don't even publish recall data in Illinois. They're all considered confidential, just like the ownership information. So, just kind of an interesting
when you're
standard.
When you're producing products at the scale that these producers are producing these products at, like they're not checking everything. You know what I mean? Like it's impossible, right? So like even stuff like potency testing, like I once bought like an ounce of small nugs and it was supposedly like 30 something percent. It's like, I don't know if like people know much about like product testing, but like the top cola maybe tests at 30 something percent, but like the rest of the plant isn't going to be that potent, So like if you're getting trim, shake, buds, and it's like or smalls and it's at 30%, like guarantee you that product is not testing that high. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other thing. People talk about cannabis testing as if it's the gold standard. Meanwhile, it's very well known that THC inflation rather, lab shopping, these are all huge problems. In fact, the state of Illinois is currently building a lab to sort of try to combat this issue. But it's nothing exclusive to Illinois. This is a national issue where um, cultivators will literally, like I said, it's called lab shopping. They will shop to find a lab that will give them the most favorable results, and even if that includes inflating um, what is in the product, you know. So this kind of a interesting.
I mean,
Again,
that's
I think it's
I don't know,
interesting when
man.
people say like cannabis testing is the gold standard.
I guess I don't know. I think I mean, labs make mistakes all the time. Like their instruments could not be as clean as they think. Like there's cross contamination. So it's not like it's not 100%. And like again, it's self regulation. So like, what part of the batch are you sending out for testing? And does that apply to the entire thing? I think it's there's ways that there are shortcomings of testing. So just again, it comes to like regulation being the silver bullet. It's not, right. So like you can mandate testing, but it comes back to is it a good business and do they care about that stuff?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So
because customers care like about how does the product make them feel, right? So like if our product was dangerous, like all these organizations are saying that intoxicating hemp is dangerous, then like this product wouldn't make people feel good and we wouldn't have repeat customers, right?
I was about to ask that. Are consumers coming in, are they confused? Because there's this sense that people are confused as to what's a real dispensary and what's federally legal hemp. Or do they not really care?
Yeah. So actually, well, there's a big difference actually between shopping at our shop and shopping at a dispensary. And like nowhere do we advertise that we're a licensed dispensary. Nowhere do I call us a dispensary. Our tagline, which is actually a trademark tagline, is "Your neighborhood weed shop," and our trademark logo has a weed leaf on it, and our trademark name is Chicago Cannabis Company. Right. So it's actually a matter of like First Amendment free speech. Like I'm legally allowed to display my logo and my tagline to sell hemp products. I mean, you may not like that. You may not agree with it. But like, I'm not going to apologize for that. So no, customers are not confused. They come in, they have a great experience. They ask our employees about the products. The products make them feel nice and they like shopping with us. And it's a great experience for them. Actually, we get a lot of people saying, wow, this is so much better because like all the dispos have like super long lines, get their IDs checked like 4 times or whatever. And they have to pay like 30-40% taxes on stuff, which quite frankly, I think that's unfair.
Yeah. What do you think is the solution to this? Like, do people just kind of have to do away with the idea that they were handed a limited market? Is that the root of this issue? Because it seems like nobody disagrees on the idea that we can, not sell to anybody under 21. Nobody seems to disagree on testing and labeling. It seems like the disagreement is on whether you're allowed to legally participate.
It's all a straw man. You know what I mean? Like they don't want regulation. They don't want us to exist. So there's no middle ground for these people. You know what I mean? Like they just want to ban us. So you can come up with all the common sense regulation you want and propose it, and they're still going to be mad and they're still going to like protest against it because they don't actually want us to be regulated. They want us to be banned.
It's just so interesting.
Is there a middle ground? Like, sure. I mean, allow more people to get licenses. It's really that simple. Like Missouri has micro business licenses for anyone that makes like less than 250K, right? So like a normal person can go get a license if they want to start a business in the industry. And I think that it should be fair like that. I don't know why, like, listen, if you can't roll out your program without like impending lawsuits, like your program's fucked up. You know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Like how
and
many lawsuits do we have in Illinois before they finally issued licenses? Like clearly there was an issue from the get-go. Like I don't know what these people were thinking. As far as like clearly whoever wrote this stuff has never operated a business, because why should I be forced to give away 51% control of my company to get a license? And why should I have to count on my competitors for my supplies? It makes no sense.
Yeah, it seems like they took a bit, like, especially with how it started off, instead of making just the business itself a competition, they made the application process and then, of course, the ensuing lawsuits part of the competition. Instead of like
Yeah,
just
like I
operating the
honestly I feel bad for these people, you know, because like I'm sure he's put a lot of hard work and dedication and time into this, and he spent, you know, $200K a year on rent and whatever. And little old me is down the street for the past 3 years, like selling hemp products. And look, I don't have any issue with him opening up his dispensary. Like, I don't know why he has an issue with me. You know,
That's
like actually in that article at the end, it's like, oh, the neighborhood thought that UMI should have a opportunity to open because Chicago Cannabis Company was already there. So it's like, you're welcome, buddy.
Yeah. I have just always found it interesting that with hemp, for example, like I said, Curaleaf, a big marijuana company, has just opened up a hemp shop, and I've not heard anybody in hemp saying, "No, they shouldn't be allowed to be in hemp." They're like, "Bring it. Bring it."
Yeah.
You know?
You know why? It's because like I don't know, man. It's like everyone forgets how to be an advocate after they get their license. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I got my nut, so fuck everybody else is like the mindset, I think. You know, and actually it is unfair for them, because even if they have a good business model and they want to expand and open up more locations, they can't. Because there's no more, they can't get more licenses unless they buy one or like swallow up another company. And I think that's unfair. I think more advocacy should be geared towards improving the CRTA program and making it more open versus trying to shut down hemp. Like why devote all your energy to shutting down businesses that are legal and operating and offering a good product and offering customers more options? Why try to shut them down instead of lobbying the people who are regulating you to make your life easier? Wouldn't it make more sense to spend more time doing that?
And that's
Like,
always something
where's Chicago Normal like doing that? Why are they coming at me?
That's something that's always stood out to me, and I've had people on the show that have said, you know, this stuff with hemp is unfair because I had to spend $200,000 on a security camera system that reports to the police. I have
Well,
to
you
buy
signed
this
up
big,
for that.
I have to buy this big vault. But to your point, not only do they have the option to get involved in hemp and not deal with those regulations, but I have also not heard any proposals to make the regulation for the CRTA less stringent. It's all just about shut them down. They don't have to do that. And it's like, why? If those are your complaints, why not address those complaints directly? You know?
Beats me. Maybe they don't want more people getting licenses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that brings me to the big question that I have for today, which is that this whole social equity thing and how we legalized cannabis, it was supposed to right the wrongs of prohibition. It was supposed to acknowledge that arresting people for using or selling cannabis was harmful, especially to marginalized communities. And so if the state moves to ban hemp products and returns to arresting people over selling cannabis, how is that any different from our old model of prohibition?
It's not.
And then my follow-up to that is how can we claim to be advancing social equity if we're still using, and we're talking about using, criminal enforcement as the primary tool for cannabis sales?
I agree with that 100%. You know, I think that it's it's a dangerous game you're playing when you're like you're calling legal businesses illegal and asking for the state to crack down with enforcement. Are you gonna do the same for like communities of color who are, you know, they can't get licenses? Like, are you gonna go down to South Shore and say, hey, they're undercutting my business here? It just doesn't add up, you know? So like
Right.
you're playing a dangerous game asking for that type of enforcement, which is like counterproductive to like what the CRTA was set up for. So like, I'm sorry, it's just not right.
Well, and my thing is, yeah, like if we do that, how are we going to right those wrongs? Are we going to come up with another limited batch of
Yeah.
licenses?
Right. You want to see me in jail and my daughter visiting me in jail? Is that what you want? Would that make you feel better?
Right. And then when you get out, maybe we'll give you a golden ticket so that you can have
Yeah, I'll be a
a little.
social equity applicant in 2024 or 20,
Yeah.
I mean 2040
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's wild,
Well,
man. I don't know what's going on. It was kind of shocking to see this article. Obviously I didn't respond to the, you know, whatever reporter reached out because she said, oh, there's allegations against you for existing, basically. And I was like, well, I already know how this article is going to be written. So why, what? So that's why I reached out to you, because I was like, you know what, let me get my side of the story, because I know Cole's unbiased, unlike some of these other people. And I can actually speak my mind and people can hear my side of the story. So I appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. Well, any other thoughts? You know, I saw this article was posted on Reddit, so I was thinking about maybe reading what other people have been saying about the story. But I wanted to just give you a thought, the space. Any other thoughts just on this whole thing, um, in general? No.
Closing thoughts. I mean, I wish them the best of luck. I think the dispensary looks great on the corner there. It looks better than the beat up restaurant that was there before. I'll even go buy something from you, and you know, maybe join a quarterly park cleanup.
Well,
All right,
that
man.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but thanks. I appreciate it.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, some people are saying these people thought they had a free money glitch by getting a license, and now they're figuring out it's not that simple.
Well, that's how industries work out, man. Like that's how it goes. You can't like what like there's price differentiation and experience differentiation in all industries, right? Like I can go to the grocery store and buy something for 20 bucks, and I can go to the nice wine shop and buy something for 60 bucks, and the experience is totally different. And both places exist, you know? So like what like again, it's scarcity mindset that you're entitled to all these customers when in reality you're not. That's not how markets work. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry that this is a limited market. I mean, limited license market. I didn't choose that. Actually, I signed a witness slip against legalization in 2020 because I saw where it was going. I was like, this is stupid, you know? And it actually ended up being stupid.
Yeah.
So that I'm a stupid ass. Sorry. I'm
No,
trying not to be too critical and like not go off on too many tangents because I want to keep it on topic. But like something's got to give and something needs to improve this industry, and shutting down hemp just isn't it.
yeah. Well, I guess my last thought, and we can close, is it's interesting how, and I've said this stat a few times on the show, but we just accept the fact that 80% of restaurants will go out of business within the first 5 years, but nobody is pushing for license limitations on restaurants. Like, we're basically saying, good luck, go ahead and try, you know, like, which I think is the American dream. Like, it's what this country is supposed to be all about, you know?
I'm living it, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tom, chicanaco.com if people want to check out your
Yeah.
website.
Or just Google Chicago Cannabis Company and we'll be the first one up there.
Yeah, I do have an interesting question for you that's not really related to anything else that we've discussed. You mentioned you have a trademark. That's one of the other things I've heard that's like kind of it's like a benefit of going hemp, for lack of better words, that you can actually register a trademark because it's not federally illegal. Thought that was
I
interesting.
think that's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
it's
that's
just
why I did it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
actually applied for that trademark myself in 2018 or 2009. I don't remember. It was like 2018. I wanted the name Chicago Cannabis Company. I applied for the trademark and I got it. And I got the weed leaf logo on there too.
That's interesting.
So if they want to ban my weed leaf, well, good luck with that.
All right. Well, dude, I want to just say before we go, I appreciate you reaching out to do this. I read this article, like I said, and thought it was crazy and checked my inbox, and there you were. So it was synchronicity there
Yeah.
with regard to making this thing happen. So,
Well, it's timely, and I hope everything works out. And check out the website for the new shop in a couple of weeks.
hell yeah.
And we'll see you there. Well,
Yeah.
not you, but like the viewers.
Well, I might try to make it up there too. I'm
All
not
right.
from Chicago, but I've always thought whenever I saw you pop up on social media, I've always thought I want to go there. Your shop looks cool. So
Yeah, come check it out. We'll hook you up.
hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, folks, I hope you found value in this conversation. I sure did. Tom, thanks again. And maybe I'll see you there at Chicago Cannabis Company. So,
Right on. All right. Thanks, Cole. Later.
in this segment, I'll be joined by someone who's been on the show before and is no stranger to the many challenges facing cannabis businesses in Illinois. Akili Parnell is the founder of UMI, a social equity dispensary located in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. Akili was recently featured in an article discussing the growing tension between dispensaries and hemp retailers. And once again, I'll have that article linked in the show notes so that you can read it for yourself. In that piece, he raised concerns about the lack of regulation around consumable hemp products and the impact of cannabis being sold outside of the state's licensed dispensary system, arguing that it's putting a strain on businesses like his that have had to clear significant legal, financial, and regulatory hurdles in order to operate. You can learn more and support his work by visiting yumidispensary.com. I'll paste that link in the show notes. And I'll also paste the social media links for Umi. Man, I am having trouble today, but Umi dispensaries so that you can follow them on social media. Akili, welcome back to the show, and my apologies for my tongue getting twisted here on the opener.
No worries, man. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing today?
Doing good.
And just real quick, you're pretty well close to opening up your dispensary. Congratulations, dude.
Yeah.
Are you getting excited?
Super excited. I mean, it's been a long journey, longer than I thought it would be for sure. But yeah, we're super pumped. Like the store is looking great. Pretty much done with construction at this point, just like final inspections, and then we're good to go.
Awesome. And it looks like if you go to their website and download their app, you can get $5 off your entire purchase. So just a tip if you're listening to this around opening time, going to that grand opening or anything. So nice. Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's get right into it. Opening a dispensary in Illinois is not hard. Or sorry, it is hard. It's not easy. Can you walk my audience through what it's taken to open up your dispensary and some of the challenges you faced during this process?
Yeah, for sure. So this process is at this point running on a 6-year journey to try to open the dispensary. And obviously there's like faster and even longer ways to do it. Obviously some challenges partly around the location that we chose, but it all started back in maybe 2018. I've been working in the industry, and I got into the industry in the beginning just to learn how the legal industry works, that ultimately I could like try to win a license and open my own store. Like literally, that was my dream from day one. And so it's definitely an honor and privilege to even have the opportunity to do that. But it started in 2018, trying to figure out what legalization was going to look like in Illinois. I've been involved in the advocacy space, trying to help shape the legislation, ensure that it would give people like me an opportunity, a fair shot to like really open a business. There's a lot of racial and ethnic disparities in entrepreneurship in general in the U.S. outside of cannabis. Definitely the case in the cannabis industry, and so I wanted to see if I could open doors for people like myself as I try to open the door for myself. So we applied for the license in 2019 when the application round came about. And the challenges are funding. I mean, it's expensive to apply. This is back when there was this competitive application process and you'd write hundreds of pages of like detailed information about security plans and how you're going to manage the seed to sell tracking of the product and custody chains and all this kind of stuff. And essentially it was a competition. So people were like, the idea was if you spend more, you put more into it, you'll have a stronger application and then maybe you'll win. And people, were a little bit more bullish about the market back then. Obviously, Illinois is still a strong market, but back then, especially, it was seen as like one of the best markets in the industry, in the country, and all that stuff. So there's a lot of interest across the country in the Illinois market, and so it was really tough. I didn't have the money to like put up like 100K or more completely at risk to maybe win a dispensary license. And so I had to bring on partners and work with other folks. And then ultimately, because, I had a background as a lawyer, we're able to like write our applications. And so I ended up writing, and I knew the product, I knew the plan, and how it worked, ended up writing all our applications, whether for dispensary or for craft grow. And, we would engage consultants here or there to strengthen the application. But it was that first. Then there was like all the madness of Illinois cannabis right in the beginning of legalization. And of course, the MSOs went first, or the existing operators, not all of them were MSOs, but the medical operators got to open up and, they got the ability to take advantage of the first sales and the lines down the street and all that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, we were waiting to maybe get a shot at a license. You've covered this before, I'm pretty sure. There's tons of litigation on a lot of different things, which ended up delaying the process for the license awards for almost 2 years, in addition to COVID. So at first it got delayed because of litigation and just people fighting about a lot of different issues. Not that those issues are minor or whatever, but mainly out-of-state folks suing over the in-state preference and a couple other things. Then the whole world shut down with COVID. And so the government, obviously turned its attention slightly away from cannabis to, how do we ensure that we're able to save lives, handle this pandemic. And that probably added at least another 8 to 12 months delay on the issuance of the dispensary licenses. And then finally, the litigation ended. COVID, we're probably in the middle of COVID, but it seemed like things were kind of stable in terms of, society, to be honest. Like, it didn't seem like the world was going to end. And then they finally started issuing dispensary licenses. But actually, let me take a step back. All the advocates had worked together to change the award process to create additional opportunities, because initially it was only going to be 75 licenses. And we were able to change the legislation to allow for the award of up to it ended up being like 200 something altogether, dispensary licenses. And then the process went from, just whoever has the highest score gets one, to whoever has a threshold score gets entered to this lottery or a series of lotteries. And then you had to be lucky at that point. So again, change plans, people spend all this money. And now the process just ends up turning into a lottery. And that was a whole crazy thing. But then we ended up being lucky and winning a license. I mean, we had I forgot what the odds were. I calculated them at some point, but we had obviously the right score, the perfect score. But then it ended up being lucky. It had like a 1 in, I don't know, maybe 1,000 chance or something. Like, we had 3 balls in the quote unquote balls in the lottery, or some people had like hundreds, if not thousands. And we got lucky and won one. And then it was off to find a location. And it took a while. We've found a few different locations. Definitely a lot of pushback in certain areas on, folks from the community not necessarily wanting a dispensary or just getting priced out. it's a competitive real estate market. And so people with more money would tend to grab up, certain locations. But we were actually able to garner a good amount of community support for this particular location in Lincoln Park. And then we're able to raise some funds from, a bunch of, friends and family, essentially, of me and my business partners. They gave us enough money to, lock in the facility. You had to have control of the facility. So we rented it, and then started going through the zoning process, which ended up being about another year and a half, 2 years, and a lot of money later. And then finally we got through all the zoning approvals that we needed, which were 2 zoning approvals. And then it was construction, and then construction went for probably about 8 months. We actually had to get our plans approved in the city of Chicago, and then it took forever to get the permits. So I was like another 2 months before we got the construction permits. Then we got the construction permits, started construction. It's an old building. It took like another 8 months, and we're finally here. Like 5+ years later.
Yeah, a lot of stop and waiting with this process, right?
Yeah.
And just to back up briefly, you had mentioned you'd done work in advocacy. Just for people that may not know, like, you were one of the founding members of Chicago Normal, right? Am I wrong in remembering that?
Yeah, I was an early member. I don't know if I'd say I was
Early member,
but I was talking a lot. So
okay, yeah. Well, I just wanted to show that the track record is there. That's my point in bringing that up. So you've been involved in, advocating for these policies for quite a while now. So you've touched on it a bit, but what inspired you to open that dispensary in Lincoln Park specifically? Like what opportunity, like, was it a strategic decision? Was it, I've like talked to different groups, and sometimes they go community to community, and sometimes it's hard to get that approval. So was it just finding the right community, or?
Yeah, so we looked at a few different locations. I looked at some in neighborhoods that I lived in, and for the most part, there was like already a dispensary there, or there was, not really community and aldermanic support for those locations. Lincoln Park, I mean, one, it's an incredible neighborhood. It's one of Chicago's most iconic and generally like desirable neighborhoods. So, that's appealing. Obviously it's, more affluent, well-off, diverse neighborhood with a mix of young professionals and families and students and long-term residents and all that stuff. And so it was both strategic and we wanted to be in the city of Chicago because, that's where pretty much most of our team lives. That's where we're most connected to the cannabis community. And so we really felt strongly about being in Chicago. We wanted a good area where people had the money to, pay for these high prices. I mean, the weed is high in Illinois in the legal market. And so, for us, our social equity owners from Woodlawn, and we had conversations about it. And, I come from a similar community, and I don't know that folks in under-resourced communities need to be paying $70, $80 for an eighth. Unless obviously some people can afford it in those neighborhoods, but that's kind of a lot of money. And there's a lot of legacy operators, and, definitely don't think that in areas where there's a food desert or other things that, what they need is an expensive cannabis dispensary. But for folks that live in those neighborhoods and really, grown up in them and know the community and all that, it may make sense for them to open one, and they can figure out, your pricing strategy. But for us, there wasn't a store over here already, so strategically it made sense. There's and the consumers in this area can certainly afford it, and so and it's a great community, great neighborhood, so it made sense.
Gotcha. And we'll get to, as I told you before we got on the show, this episode will also include the perspective of somebody else that was mentioned in the article. So I'll get to specific things that they had said that I'd like to, for you to have an opportunity to respond to. But just generally speaking, you've spoken out about the regulations, or I think what you might refer to as the lack of regulations around hemp, right? And I guess my first question that I wanted to ask you was, what kind of regulatory framework would you like to see implemented, for like these hemp derived cannabis products?
Yeah. So for the intoxicating, I'll say in particular, so for the intoxicating hemp-derived cannabis products, the ones that are at least being sold as weed or marijuana, to lay people and regular consumers, I just want all the products treated the same. Like, if you're running essentially a dispensary, calling yourself a dispensary, yeah, you should be regulated like a weed dispensary. For folks that are selling non-intoxicating hemp products and CBD products, I mean, I don't even think I'm not advocating for any particular framework for them, other than something reasonable in terms of public health, safety, quality testing, things like that. Like we want to know what's in things that we're ingesting, as we should, and as we try to in any other industry, whether it's food and beverage or whatever. So yeah, for the non-intoxicating stuff, usually not even speaking in respect to them. For the intoxicating products that mostly emerged after people realized there's an oversight in the Farm Bill, I think that they should be treated the same as all the other intoxicating cannabis products.
Yeah, and by that you mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like only sold in dispensaries, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm flexible. It doesn't have to be the only way, but at the end of the day, at least similar framework. I mean, we can call it, we can have the quote unquote cannabis dispensaries, and then we can have, intoxicating hemp dispensaries. They can have their own license, regime or whatever, but regulated by the Department of Agriculture, because that's the only reasonable body to regulate them at the state level, at least. And so regulated by the Department of Agriculture in the same way that they regulate us, or reduce the regulations on our side to match. Basically, it's got to be the same. If we're selling to what consumers think is essentially the same product, then it needs to be treated the same, in my opinion.
Yeah. And how would you respond to those? And we'll get to more specific claims, like I said, that were aired from our specific guests. But I'm sure you've heard this talking point before, so I just would like to give you the chance to formally respond to it. How do you respond to those who argue that banning hemp products amounts to continued prohibition? And they always say that folks like yourself that have been fighting to end cannabis prohibition, they're like, well, how are they pushing for a prohibition? Do you dispute that it is like a prohibition, or like what's your stance, I guess, just on that talking point?
I think it's kind of, I don't want to make light of it, but it's I almost kind of chuckle sometimes when people make that argument, because I'm like, I'm pretty sure nobody anywhere ever was going to prison or risking their life to sell Delta 8 or Delta 9 flower. Since when is that a thing? As far as I know, my entire life, people were risking their freedom and all that stuff. And prohibition was one designed to criminalize people of color, and most of the people that are making that argument are not. So that is a real thing. Not to say that non-POC and white folks weren't, captured up and or went to prison or affected by the war on drugs. Everybody is. But, just be real about the real risk there in terms of, prohibition and incarceration. And then two, most of the people that are running smoke shops and all that kind of stuff now, not all, but from what I can tell, we're not long-term cannabis people or champions and advocates, and then we're working against ending legalization before. Most of the folks I've literally never seen in any organizing settings at all around the issue of cannabis legalization. And I really think it's just a distraction. We have some form of legalization. Obviously, legalization doesn't legalize everything in all amounts, no matter what. That's not really the case in any kind of controlled substance. And maybe one day we get there in a way that makes sense. Saying that it's continuing prohibition, regulation is not prohibition. If we're saying ban all Delta 8 and Delta 9 products, nobody's trying to ban hemp products. We're saying ban intoxicating cannabis products that are unregulated. Until they're regulated. Then once they're regulated, then I guess there's no ban. And it's also about public health and public safety, which those are real concerns. It doesn't really land with me.
Right. Well, and to that question, and we've touched on this topic in the past. Well, I think one of the first episodes you had come on, and you sort of mentioned it, I think, in your response. But some have pointed out that like legislation, like the bill that was proposed recently by Senator Lori Lightford, would basically make it so that, as you describe, all intoxicating cannabis products would have to be sold in the dispensary, and if they aren't, the legislation would add $10,000 daily fines in addition to criminal penalties outlined in the Cannabis Control Act. So that I think is what they're saying with the prohibition. Like you say, it's not complete prohibition. I would say maybe it's like limited prohibition. And this brings me to my next question, and feel free to respond what I just said as well. But just looping in the what I mean by limited prohibition. Some critics say that limiting licenses, even in the name of equity, creates this artificial scarcity, makes the market harder to enter. And then if the enforcement mechanism is the criminal law, like how would you respond to people that say that the better path to equity is broader access and not these limitations?
Yeah, so first I would say the idea that regulating or limiting, the availability or the production of something is prohibition, to me is absurd, because you literally do that in every industry. So just because now we're talking about cannabis, like if I don't pay my bills, at a certain point, the police are going to come get me. Like, that's like for any industry, that's for anything almost. Like, if me and you form a contract and then, you agree to sell me a thing for $10,000 and I completely stiff you on it and just never pay you. And then you go to court and get a judgment. Eventually, I'm probably going to get in trouble for that, potentially go to jail. If I open a lemonade stand without a license, or if I do something negligent as I operate a lemonade stand or violate public health laws, I'm eventually probably going to end up in prison. And so, yeah, I think some of those perspectives, while well-meaning and coming from the right place, are just kind of myopic and naive, because it's kind of like that's how almost every industry works. Is regulation you have to comply with or you get in trouble. And you can't just do whatever you want in anything. I can't just open a grocery store without a license, without certain approvals, a business license from the city, and all this other stuff you have to comply with. And if you do, you end up going to jail. So so there's that. And then as far as the limited license framework, again, I think that argument is kind of lives in, I don't know how to put it. I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but it's kind of like a fantasy world about how American capitalism works. Like, you don't have licenses for most, other than a city business license. You don't need like a license to open, a store that's going to compete with Walmart, but go give it your best shot. You probably go out of business. Like, most industries are completely dominated by large corporations, because in an oversaturated, unregulated industry where as many competitors can jump in as they want, the most well-capitalized, well-resourced businesses are the ones that end up thriving, and they can drive retail prices down, drive wholesale prices down, and they have national supply chains and deep cash reserves and the ability to operate at a loss, which is what you'll end up doing for an extended amount of period, for an extended period, and that pretty much only benefits, mega corporations. And we see that in the grocery industry, where eventually we just ended up with like a bunch of Walmarts mostly, or just chains and stuff, and mom and pop stores are struggling. So it's kind of to me, seems like a naive perspective about how American capitalism treats small business. And I don't see why cannabis will be any different, especially with the really high taxes.
Yeah. And, I would say another industry in which you see this is restaurants, right? Where, you go through it's almost a meme. I've actually seen a meme where it's like the typical American town, and you see McDonald's, Arby's, like you don't see big signs for restaurants. But on that same token, I think the stat is in the first 5 years, 80% of restaurants will go out of business. And it's because precisely of what you were just talking about. You know, you're going against people that are much bigger than you, much more capitalized than you. But I guess my question is, and I want to get back to license limitations in a moment, because I actually have come around on this issue, and I do think that there are certain ways in which it makes sense to limit licenses. But just with that restaurant example, like, even though 80% of restaurants do go out of business within the first 5 years, we don't have necessarily like limitations on those licenses. You know what I mean? And to your point, if you do something pretty serious, you could get in serious trouble. But for the most part, it seems like the mechanism of enforcement there is like a business offense, where it's like the health department comes by, you don't have a food license. Well, that's a problem and you're going to get fined. But it seems like with cannabis, like I say, the criminal law that comes into the equation instead of like a business law or a business offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's still criminalized. Well, for sure. And should it be criminal? Well, here, I'm going to say this, like, selling anything unregulated is in some form or fashion going to be criminalized. Obviously there's state criminal law, and then there's also federal tax law. So, you know, if you're selling, say, you know, the state of Illinois says you can sell however much you want at any amount, unregulated, untested, all that, and it's not a criminal offense, maybe a, you know, like a public health, you know, violation or whatever. The federal government's still going to be like, hey, you didn't pay any taxes on that. So you're still in trouble with the federal government from a tax law perspective. And eventually that will become a crime too. But obviously I don't support the war on drugs. But, you know, there's a lot of competing interest in this. And I think just taking the license cap off, I don't see how that helps, really. I don't see how that would help drive equity at all. Like, because one, it still requires a lot of capital to, one, open your business in this industry, and removing license caps doesn't change that. And then, because, you know, securing a location still costs the same amount, building it out still costs the same amount. And those are your main upfront costs. Getting through zoning still costs the same amount, regardless of the license cap. What happens is, though, that the economic prospects for your business are now just lower. And so now, maybe before, when you go to an investor and say, hey, we can probably, here's the market, there's a bunch of people here, there's only so many licenses. You know, if I got one, I got lucky, I'm social equity, you got to work with me to do it. You know, we can make $5 million in revenue a year. It'll cost $1.2 million to open this store up. An investor might be like, okay, cool. But now if you change that and there's no license cap, then the average dispensary revenue goes down to what you see in states where the market is really bad, at least for businesses. You know, maybe the average revenue is $1 million or less, but it still takes $1 million to build out a store in a nice area or something like that. Now all of a sudden the investor's like, no, I'm not going to give you that money. Or it'll just end up being the people that have a bunch of money and will just go and open a store. So folks that don't have money, why? Like, if I have money and I can get a license, and then you don't have money and you do have a license, like, why would I partner with you? I have no reason to partner with you now, because I have the money and I'll just do it myself. And that's what you see with most businesses. But the people that bring the capital own and control and run the thing. I mean, you still kind of see that in cannabis. And so not limiting licenses, in my opinion, I think it's kind of a naive perspective to think that all of a sudden your average Joe is now going to have a chance to compete when it still costs a ton to do the thing. I don't see where they're going to get the money from. And limited licenses allows us, particularly social equity folks, to raise capital, and otherwise it would be nearly impossible.
Yeah, like you say, yeah, even if we limited the licenses, the licensing fees, all of the security requirements, like all of those things are super costly. And so maybe we can get back to the idea that you said earlier about reducing those regulations. But I just wanted to briefly say, you know, one of the things I actually do like, and this might surprise some of my listeners, are some of the license limitations we have. And I'm specifically talking about the ownership limitations, which would prevent it kind of, the hope is, and I think the inspiration behind that license limitation. So for those that are wondering, you can have a maximum of 10 dispensaries and 3 cultivation centers. And the idea behind that, I think, is good. It's the idea to prevent any one person from becoming a mega, sort of like a Walmart, if you will. Like, and that's not to say that there won't be bigger companies, but at least your footprint maximum will always be the same. So I think that's a really good, actually, ownership limitation that we have. One of the things that Scott Redmond taught me, because we've had this discussion about license limitations in the past, and he said, Cole, they limit licenses for other businesses too. And I was like, I didn't know that until I actually went to Evergreen Park for like a meeting where the folks at 1937 Group were trying to open up a dispensary, and they mentioned we have a limitation on the number of bars allowed in the town. They even had a limitation on the number of smoke shops allowed in the town. And I guess that's really where I approach limited licenses at this point. I'm not opposed to like a locality like Evergreen Park or, Chicago or places around Chicago or small towns from setting their own license caps. It just seems like when the state sets that license cap, that I don't know, almost seems too big when local governments can deal with that. You know what I mean? But
yeah, I mean, it's something they did in Jersey, where in Jersey, I don't think the state really has a license cap, but each municipality creates its own, however many licenses they want. I would say, I mean, that's kind of going to be the case regardless, because every municipality can just regulate dispensaries through zoning. They just be like, hey, I mean, and I've seen this before. Where they
like Naperville for the longest time, right? Even though dispensaries, the licenses were there, they said, we don't want any dispensaries here. Am I thinking right? Was that Naperville? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did. It was a lot of them in the beginning that said that.
Right.
Yeah.
Quickly changed their mind though.
Yeah, exactly. The one reason I don't love those though, because also what you end up seeing in Jersey is these localities, you see some corruption where it's just like in these smaller municipalities where it's like you only get zoning if you know somebody or you gave them big donations or this, that, and the other. And not accusing any particular municipality, but I've heard these things happen. So that is my one thing about, I trust in some cases the state because there's more transparency and more oversight in what they do than smaller municipalities. And sometimes they're kind of insular and stuff like that. So like if you're from outside there, they should be like, no, we've never heard of you. You can't operate here. So, but yeah, no, I mean, but I also get it. I understand why people oppose license caps, and like in an ideal world where everybody has access to capital, I would too. Like if everybody got $1 million and the playing field was fair across, socioeconomic and ethnic lines and all that stuff, then I would be like, yeah, no license caps. But without it, I just don't see how it benefits small people. Although I understand why people think that. I just don't see it.
Yeah. One of the things you had broken down, and then we'll move on, that I appreciated that you broke down in the past was like, a lot of times from the consumers, like you can see why, because I always kind of vouch for the consumer's perspective. You had said in the past, you're like, yeah, from a consumer's perspective, unlimited licensing is awesome. But from a business perspective, back to what you were saying earlier, and this is actually how, trying to think of who it was. I think it was Charlie Bachtel. He came onto the podcast and he said, look, he basically said exactly what you just said, which is like from a forecastable perspective, when you're trying to have these conversations with investors, like unlimited licensing makes it nearly impossible to forecast projections because the result is always the prices go down.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, I mean, from a consumer, and like I got into this because obviously I love cannabis, and from a consumer perspective, I mean, my favorite stage to go and buy legal cannabis in is 100% the like less regulated markets, for sure. I mean, they just have like competition can improve the quality of a product, and you do see that in California and Colorado. Not that those are, I mean, they have like license limitations sometimes at municipal level or whatever, but way more licenses out there. Obviously businesses are getting slaughtered. Michigan too, it's great. Would I want to start as a business in Michigan? No, not right now. But would I want to go, have a field day like weekend there and just check out all the stores and consumption lounges and all that? Absolutely. Are most of those going to go out of business in probably 5 years? Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, well, just like you said, in 5 years, just kind of like restaurants. So, so you kind of already addressed this question, but there are proposals now that believe that, or they're kind of centered around this idea that regulation on hemp should be rooted in quality control, age gating, and accurate labeling rather than limiting access. Again, you kind of already addressed this, but anything else you'd like to mention? Like, what's your take on that approach?
Yeah. I think it's really just about like accountability and like parity and like safety. Like a lot of the products that are coming into the state on the intoxicating hemp side are, not manufactured in Illinois, so it's not like necessarily helping Illinoisans. Some degree is, and that's great. I think that's awesome. But then also, like, I don't know. I mean, in some way, I'm just a purist. Like, my ideal form of consumption would just be like completely organic, soil grown cannabis, not necessarily outdoor, but outdoor, indoor, whatever. And in terms of extraction, like I prefer, solventless extraction. I think it's just all healthier and all that, but I'm not a scientist. And so once we get into like, not, I understand that like, not all, intoxicating hemp products are like synthetically derived or whatever. You can get into all the different terms and details and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, for the most part though, they were created not because of people just like, oh, I love the plant, I want to create this new form factor where people can consume it. It's created mostly to get around the hemp bill and for people to make like quick money. So, from like a cannabis like culture perspective, I don't really understand like the virtue behind having most of those products in the market, because most consumers, if given the chance and full, like, all the information, would more often than not just choose traditional marijuana or marijuana derived products. Obviously, maybe DA, hits not as hard as what some people say, or I've tried it or whatever. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, some drinks are incredible. I actually like it more on the drink side than anything else. I think there's some really great products out there for sure. But as far as like your core cannabis products and stuff like that, yeah, there's just, we don't really know what the impacts of these things are. We still don't even know the impact of like all the, form factors of, the regular cannabis products and at the THC levels and all this kind of stuff that are new that we didn't have when we were, 10, 20 years ago or whatever. And not to give like any, credibility to, folks that are like, oh, this new weed is dangerous and we don't know what it's going to do and blah, blah, blah. And they don't have any evidence of that. I'm not trying to go in that direction, but, there is something to be said for, fully testing products for, contaminants and heavy metals and mold and all this stuff. And as far as I can tell, intoxicating hemp products are not really tested for that unless the operator just wants to be a good person. And if I can tell anything from history is that you can't trust a business to look out for your public health. Like, I don't know when that's ever been a good idea, when their main motivation is to make money. So you can't really rely on them to regulate themselves. So that just seems dangerous from a public health perspective.
Yeah, to your point, really the only requirement, if we're going to talk requirements for hemp, is to make sure that that Delta 9 percentage is not above 0.3%. Like you say, the full panel tests aren't required. The mold, all those things are not required. And you might be able to find a person that does it out of the goodness of their heart and stuff. But to your point, it is not required. And that is a difference between the two structures. So, just moving on for a moment, if the state doesn't, and then we'll be getting to some claims that were made with my conversation from Tom from Chicago Cannabis Company. If the state doesn't act on, some of these proposals that you've always support for in the past, like I believe you supported Leader Lightford's proposal, which was 4293. If that doesn't come to fruition, if that weren't to happen, what do you see as the long-term implications for social equity operators like yourself?
Yeah, I think it just becomes harder for us to get up and run and to operate. Obviously, would probably make a little less money. I don't know how much. I don't know that there's like clear studies on the overlap between our consumers and their consumers and all that stuff. But it's clearly not ideal to go through all this, spend all this money to open a dispensary, and then have another store that's not technically a dispensary, brand itself as a dispensary and not have to deal with any of the regulations or pay the taxes that we do, and then sell a similar product. Obviously, that's going to harm social equity, and we've just been playing by the game as it was made. By the state and trying to be as compliant as possible. And so it definitely undercuts our business. Does that mean that, the social equity businesses won't survive? Like, no, but it's tough in general for the industry. The big boys are struggling. Everybody's kind of struggling at this point. They're not struggling, but it's a challenge. I mean, some folks are obviously doing well, but otherwise we wouldn't be trying to do this. But yeah, it's definitely going to continue to confuse consumers. Eventually we could share some of the blame if there's some public health issue or something like that stems from their lack of testing. Then certain folks, especially the pro-prohibition people, the anti-cannabis folks, will just blame all of us, as is usually what happens, with no nuance. And so yeah, and ultimately it's just not fair.
Gotcha. And when we talk about, I've got just two more questions, and then I'll get to the kind of the things that were said in our conversation with Tom from Chicago Cannabis Company, which, by the way, I don't know if we'll make this happen. I don't know if it's worth all of our time to make it happen, but I appreciate you and Tom. I both asked both of you if you'd be willing to just like hop on air together, and you both said yes. So I just appreciate that, even though we may not see eye to eye together on some of these things, like the fact that you both are willing to hop on and still have a conversation. Like, I just think that's a good thing for like society, so I just wanted to applaud both of you briefly for being willing to do that, even though we've not actually even made plans to do it yet. Just the idea that you're open to it is really good, and wanted to give kudos there. When we talk about social equity in cannabis, especially here in Illinois, what does that mean to you? And you have sort of addressed this, but I have a clip from Governor Pritzker where he sort of blends the definition of social equity with limiting licenses, and why we did it that way. But like, what is social equity to you?
Yeah. So social equity. So there's social equity, like the concept, like in its purest form, outside of like all the limitations of state law and the Constitution and all that stuff. And I say that I'm a lawyer, so I'm not gonna try to get like all into the weeds and stuff, but like legal, like there's like, as just a regular person, there's like what's right, and then there's the law, and those are not necessarily the same thing. Oftentimes they're not the same thing.
Right.
So like from a social equity, like social justice perspective, like social equity would be, a system of programs and policies designed to help repair the harms of the war on drugs through cannabis legalization, both legalization efforts, meaning like the R3 fund, and then in addition, providing opportunities to participate in the business and the growth of the industry and the wealth that's created in a way that, sort of helps funnel some funds back to those communities that had so much disinvested from them throughout the war on drugs, and then provides entrepreneurs from, primarily Black and brown communities, because those are the communities that were most impacted negatively by the war on drugs, with, support and resources to help them launch successful businesses where they would otherwise be disadvantaged in large part because of the systemic war on drugs. And so social equity sort of works to help ameliorate some of those harms, not fix all of them. Of course, in an ideal world, we'll be able to fix them. I don't know that's possible. It's, harm that's been done over decades and in the trillions of dollars at this point. Obviously, the state doesn't have that kind of money, and dispensaries don't generate that much money. But, just enshrining some of that ethos of fairness and repair into our licensed cannabis industry and in cannabis and legalization. So that's a long way of saying it, but essentially just trying to repair the harms of the war on drugs as much you can through cannabis legalization.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll play this clip here from Governor Pritzker here in a second, but that's, where I see, like, it's like we're trying to address the harms of the war, repair the harms of the war on drugs, um, through, like you say, the R3 program and other efforts. And we are also, issuing these licenses so that folks that either lived in those areas or have been affected by these policies have a chance to participate in the solution. And I guess like the rub for me, and maybe this is just like going forward, but I'm curious like what your perspective is on this. Like, it seems like if the punishment for like doing cannabis activity without a license is the criminal law, like I start to wonder like how are we going to right those wrongs? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say if I don't know outside of it, like, okay, so if those harms occur along like disproportionately like socioeconomic or racial lines or something, like,
Like you mentioned earlier, like in the south side of Chicago, I read the Chicago Tribune and even the University of Illinois so the Chicago Tribune first reported it, then the University of Illinois kind of studied it, and they found that arrests for sale and possession continue primarily in areas without dispensaries. And it's like, well, fuck, those just seem like, aspiring entrepreneurs that just couldn't get their license.
I would say so. Most of the legacy people that I talk to, and this is not legal advice by any stretch of the imagination, but you're probably going to make more money in the unregulated market if for no other reason, like 280E taxes and the cost of operating. And so, like, say you give all the people in the unregulated underground market, the South and West Side licenses. A lot of people are not, single product vendors. You know what I mean? So the other products may not be legal. So I don't know how that would disrupt their business. But then too, if I give you a license, okay, well now do you have a bunch of free cash that is in a bank that you can spend and is clear and free of any, money laundering issues that you can then go and drop $1 million to build out a store and go through all this stuff and then pay, a 70% effective tax rate on where now you're not paying anything. So I don't know that the economics work out for a lot of, and I think a lot of people that did make the jump are realizing that, where it's like, dang, you make a lot more money. Obviously, there's more risk in the unregulated market, if for no other reason, regulations and taxes, and the taxes aren't going anywhere, and that's a federal government issue. So I wouldn't recommend that. I would not necessarily recommend that unregulated folks, especially in those communities, go and try to open up a store, because you just make less money and you got a big tax bill now.
Yeah. Well, let's put a pin in that for a second. I just want to play this very short clip from Governor Pritzker that kind of describes how we've been focused on equity. So here it is.
Work. But remember, one of the reasons that we have had some challenges has been because we've been so focused on equity. Now, what I mean to say is I know that there are people who write about this, that there are other states that have opened up the number of licenses to hundreds and hundreds of licensees, and they have more dispensaries open than we do. But the reality is that we've limited the number of licensees in part because we wanted to make sure that the social equity licensees had a fair shot in the industry and they weren't just edged out to the very end and by having too many dispensaries in the market so that people can't make money, entrepreneurs who open places like Ivy Hall. So
right, like it seems like we've paired kind of social equity with the concept of limited licensing. And like I say, I think that's the one part where before I move to their claims, I do get a little bit conflicted, because it's like if the answer well, okay, so I've kind of already said that. One of the things you said is even if we opened up the licensing, it's not like for myself, which I have no aspirations to get in the business or anything, but just to use myself as a hypothetical example, and maybe spill the beans on my financial situation. I don't have the money to do and comply with all of the regulations for the cannabis system in Illinois. And so that kind of leads me to my last question before I present you with some claims that Tom said. Like, and you mentioned this earlier. You actually kind of inspired this. I did not have this question prepared. You talked about like, well, what if we reduce the regulations? Like, for example, those security regulations. I hear the bank vault is a big one because you got to get like this double reinforced steel thing. The transportation regulations are crazy. In fact, there's a report. I'm not going to play it now, but it talks about how technically the regulations for transporting opioids are less stringent than cannabis. Like they actually asked a DEA consultant and they said you could deliver opioids on a bicycle if you wanted to. And I was like, geez, that seems fucking crazy. So maybe we're not pushing for that. I mean, I don't know. I feel like weed's been delivered via bicycle in the past, but I guess my question here is like, do you foresee a future where people like yourself or other licensed operators will be pushing to like take down the regulations? Because it seems like we're treating cannabis like nuclear material with this current program.
Oh, 100%. Oh my God. No, for sure. Look, I definitely want less regulations in the space. It's not, in my opinion, necessary. I get it because like they came about because in the beginning everybody was afraid, or not everybody, so many stakeholders and people in the general public were afraid because it's, we're legalizing a federally illegal drug that's been illegal for, at that point, almost, 100 years or whatever, 90 years, however many years have been essentially illegal. And, if you look at California, I have a lot of friends in the industry in California. I mean, people do get robbed a lot in California. It's not funny, but there are a lot of robberies in California and the regulations are a little lax, but there's also a lot of other, factors that, play into that. At the same time, me and my partner and her family, they're from New York, the Legacy family, and we won one of the first dispensary licenses in New York too, and opened a store up there called New Bay in the Bronx. And New York has less stringent operational regulations. They have other regulations, which I think are really annoying. But the security regulations are far more lax, and it's cheaper to open a dispensary in New York, aside from New York real estate costs. But like in terms of the build out and the security, your vault is not like this like bank grade, like, mesh wall vault. It's just like, hey, put some cages up, blah, blah, blah. And the dispensaries, you just walk right in, you get carded like you're going to, like a bar or a liquor store. I mean, they're basically treating them like liquor stores. It seems pretty safe. I mean, not to say that nothing ever happens, but I think, in the beginning we thought there would be like heist level or heat level heist and stuff like that. Have you seen the movie Heat? Like, and that just has not happened here. I mean, fortunately it has happened in California, but most places it doesn't happen. And I think it's unlikely to happen here. And those things do drive up the cost. So yeah, I would love to see that reduced. And the use of like the weed leaf. Like I would love to have, a weed leaf, in our, we're not going to do this ship and sale, but like, in our branding or logo or somewhere in the store window, not in the, a way that is like cheesy or whatever, trite or whatever, but like that's something we can't even do. I think that's kind of overkill. And also with the marketing regulations, like not appealing to kids aren't coming in, they can't even get in. I mean, there's like so many barriers for a kid to come in and even try to buy cannabis. So I think a lot of those regulations we now see are unnecessary, but getting them changed through the state legislature is just an enormous task. Getting anything passed through the state assembly is a lot.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, the like I said, that recent hemp bill, it did fail during the last session. I wouldn't be surprised if it pops back up again. I just want to briefly play House Speaker Chris Welch's comments I just realized I had this clip ready, and then we'll finally transition to Tom's claims and run through those to close the show. But here's this clip from Chris Welch after that bill did not, well, it failed. So here's the clip.
Welch says tensions ran high due to lingering bad feelings about the lack of minority ownership in the legal cannabis system.
There's a perception that the social equity program was not done correctly in the cannabis space. And here we have an industry where there are a lot of Black and brown owners currently in existence, and the legislation that's currently proposed would literally put those people out of business right now. And it would turn it over to the cannabis people.
Any thoughts on that clip? Because that is that's like the kind of the narrative, if you will, from those involved in hemp, that it's like, well, it'll just close down all of our shops and hand all over our business to people in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying when I hear that because, Speaker Welch, and I've worked with him before on social equity initiatives and efforts prior to legalization and shortly after. And so I know, he's certainly, his heart is certainly in the right spot. But there's just so much misinformation on that side. Like the majority of the owners on that side are not Black and brown folks. I know like two, maybe three if I stretch it. And so this perspective that a bunch of Black and brown shop owners are going to be put out of business, and there's social equity on that side, I think is almost absurd. It's misinformation, and just like it's actually pretty irritating because I know, there's way more on our side, and if you think about their supply chain and everything else, then it makes sense. And so will some of them get put out of business? Well, if what you're selling is stuff that should be regulated by the Department of Agriculture and you can't keep up with those regulations the way that we do and all that, then you may end up going out of business. Our effort is not to put anybody out of business, but if I go start a business because of a federal oversight and then, regulators, whether at the state level or the federal level, catch on to that and then work to close that oversight, and the oversight is no public health regulation and no like you can't, that's not a business model that you can expect will be sustainable into the future. I don't know why anybody would think that that's something that would exist for a long amount of time. I would say on those two things, that's misinformation, that there's a bunch of Black and brown folks on that side, because I know a couple, and I want those folks that I do know to be successful. I mean, all of them. This is not an attempt to put them out of business, but I don't know why they would think that this was like a long-term play. I thought in the beginning, people were going the DA D9 route because it was like a quick money grab, which I get from a business perspective. But in the beginning, nobody thought like, oh yeah, this is like a long-term thing, because why would you have thought that?
Yeah. So to segue to some of the points that Tom had brought up, one of the points that came up in my conversation with Tom from Chicago Cannabis Company, I believe he is the owner, was that many licensed cannabis operators, including some major brands like Green Thumb Industries, who I believe you mentioned in the past, you had maybe worked with Curaleaf, which GTI and Curaleaf are interesting because they're selling their hemp products now in Illinois and many other states D2C, but Curaleaf specifically just opened up a hemp dispensary in Florida. You got brands like Wana, Wild Cookies, and many other recognized brands. They're, like I say, they're in this hemp derived space. And like you said, one of the core arguments made by operators in the Illinois State Cannabis Program is that these hemp businesses are sidestepping the high costs and burdens of the tax and regulate system, things like limited licensing, zoning restrictions, the security infrastructure, and the recurring fees, which is where I think a lot of that money comes into play. But so given that many of these licensed cannabis companies are participating in the hemp market, and considering that anyone can apply for a hemp license while access to dispensary licenses is closed, I don't think they're going to be issuing more licenses. How do you respond to the idea that Tom shared, which is that it's not the hemp market that's unfair, it's the CRTA framework that's unfair?
I'm not sure what he means by. I don't understand how large cannabis businesses also playing in the hemp space has to do with CRTA fairness or unfairness. I guess I don't quite get the point. yeah, it should be no surprise. Yeah, big businesses are in that space. GTI has it's not really a dispensary, but it's like you can buy, I don't know, you can buy beverages or something out of there at the salt shed. But
Yeah, true. Right.
yeah, I mean, but even if they did, I mean, yeah, that's what's gonna happen. The longer that, the intoxicating hemp market, remains open, all the big boys are just gonna come over there and play in that, and they can play way more aggressive in that because the tax burden is way lower, the regulations are way lower. I mean, who's always advocating for less regulation? It's called big business in any industry, and that's only going to benefit them. So yeah, that's going to come. So the idea that I'm almost confused. I'm like, yeah, eventually all the big businesses are going to be over there, and they're going to drown them out too. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and I am aware of one social equity business. It's a River Bluff Collective. They were on our episode together that we did in the past, and they have a social equity license, and they're now in hemp. And they say they're financing their hemp operation or their cannabis operation with hemp because they were having trouble getting capital. I don't know. I guess it's just like since nothing is stopping anyone from entering the hemp space and they benefit from all of these things that you don't have to deal with, like the security, 280E, something you mentioned, they can accept credit cards. Like, I just wonder, like, and I know I sort of already asked this question, but like, do you think the focus, instead of doing away with some of these things, will instead be adopting some of those concepts from hemp to make the market easier for folks like yourself?
Maybe on the marketing regulation side, on the testing, quality, all that stuff, like, nah, because like I can't imagine the Department of Health and Department of Ag just being like, oh yeah, we don't care what's in that stuff. You can just sell it. Like, they're never gonna get there. So yeah, no, I don't. And then yeah, I mean, most of the regulations outside the security stuff and the marketing stuff, they can definitely relax on at a certain point. But the testing stuff, maybe the mold threshold will be increased and be more similar to like, California or Colorado or something like that. And not that we're advocating for like moldy weed, but you know what I mean, like that.
No, I know exactly what you mean. We've talked about it on the show with people in labs and people in the industry before, where the testing standards are almost so strict that you have to like over dry your product and stuff. It is ridiculous. So I could see where you would say that. But back to, something that I already kind of asked, like it seems like the proposals that I've seen for hemp is like you said, wouldn't be doing away with testing or labeling or even the age gate, but it really does seem, just to be kind of candid, like it seems like what hemp is, and this is why I found it so fascinating, they're using it as a vehicle to directly challenge the limited license model. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't think so. I think what they're doing is, in business, you try to find loopholes and ways to not comply with whatever, in general business, try to comply with as little stuff as they have to, because it just increases your cost. And so they found a way to not comply with most of those things and then make money selling a product and getting around it. I think that's mainly the point. I don't know that there's some philosophical or political. I don't think there's a political point most of the folks are trying to make. So,
right. Well, I've just seen like I know LaShawn Ford had a bill for a while, but I also know the Illinois Hemp Growers Association introduced a bill where it's like, if you don't test your product, if you don't label it accurately, and if you sell it to somebody underage, you will get in trouble. Like you said earlier, it's like there's got to be rules, right? But what it does not do is limit like the ability to participate in the market, right?
Yeah, I mean, the economy does that. Well, I would say the wealth disparities do that, and just the way that business generally works. Like, I mean, there's a lot of businesses that you don't need a license to start, but you'll never get the cash for it. And so I think that's the part that the people who argue for no limited licenses, I think they're probably coming from a certain degree of, either privilege in terms of like economic and social privilege and standing, where they're just like, oh yeah, I got the cash, I can get the cash, got it in my network, and stuff. But for the average person from Woodlawn or the south side or the west side, like that's not going to help them. So
yeah. So Tom says that his shop makes no attempt to appear as a licensed dispensary. He says his branding includes a weed leaf, the name Chicago Cannabis Company, and the phrase neighborhood weed shop, which are all trademarked and, in his view, protected by free speech. Do you think that kind of branding causes consumer confusion, or is it legitimate expression under the law?
Yeah, I don't understand the free speech argument because that's separate. Like, commercial speech is not free speech necessarily. It's not true. It's not political speech. I'm not trying to get all lawyerly and constitutional law shit, but
you are a lawyer.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, commercial speech is not treated the same as like what you think of with your free speech. That's for you to advocate for how to make society better and stuff like that. Obviously, businesses have a form of free speech, but anyway. No, I mean, let's be for real. I mean, some of the stuff, again, I have nothing against them. I like a lot of stuff about their store looks cool and stuff like that. I like it. I'm just saying it's not fair for them to be able to do these things. And at the end of the day, the people in the intoxicating hemp space are, trying to sell their product as weed. I mean, it says your neighborhood weed shop. Obviously everybody knows what that means when you say, hey, we have weed, come buy it. So yeah, let's just be frank about it.
Yeah. I'm just going to keep machine gunning through these here out of respect for your time. And thanks again, by the way, for spending the time with me to talk about this. In the conversation I had with Tom, he claimed that the same group calling for hemp regulations also came to Chicago City Hall to protest proposed hemp regulations in Chicago. And he said that this shows your group doesn't actually want regulation. They just want to ban hemp entirely and force all sales into dispensaries. Your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is, I think he's creating a false dichotomy. One, saying that we want all the sales, some people do want all hemp to be sold or intoxicating hemp to be sold through cannabis dispensaries that are regulated on the CRTA. At the same time, that is a form of regulation. That may not be the kind that you like. It's not a ban. It just means they have to be sold through, all weed is sold through, weed dispensaries that are regulated by the state. Yeah, we oppose that regulation. I mean, I guess he's setting it up where if we didn't support their proposal, then we're just against everything. I'm like, no, we didn't like that proposal. One, it had the city of Chicago regulating hemp. The city of Chicago does not, by any stretch of the imagination, have the capacity to regulate intoxicating hemp products. That should obviously be the Department of Agriculture and the Illinois Department of Public Health, city of Chicago. And I've talked to different aldermen about it. I mean, it's not even really there's no argument for it. They can't regulate that. They don't have the capacity to. They can barely fix the roads. They can't even fix the roads. They don't have time to create a whole new department that doesn't have the skill set. They don't have the money to do it. It's like a fantasy. So yeah, that's why we didn't support that regulation, because it's completely impractical and will not do anything.
And he also said that the push to ban hemp is a, quote, scarcity mindset that's about wanting fewer competitors, not safety or fairness. What would you say to that? Is this about limiting licensing and not really about the safety regulations?
No, I mean, we already have limited licenses. It's not about limiting the licensing. It's about having a fair playing field and not having to deal with, trying to think of how to put it, but people trying to imitate, our business or dispensary, but not follow any of the rules. And yeah, I mean, that's what it's about. It's about having a fair playing field and protecting real social equity entrepreneurs that have put blood, sweat, and tears and tons of money into this. So that's what it's about.
And do you think there's a path forward that includes hemp products sold outside of dispensaries, or is it just dispensaries? I think we kind of discussed that, but that's another note I took from our conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm open to either structure. I mean, I think the one that makes the most sense is just it's sold in dispensaries. Obviously, people that have intoxicating hemp shops aren't going to want that. I don't know that there's a world where all our business interests are aligned. It's not even about probably anything beyond that. It's just, that doesn't really make sense for us. It's not consistent with what Illinois intended to do. So that's the other thing too that I think a lot of the hemp folks miss is like nobody, neither the federal government or the state, intended for them to exist. No, so that they exist, obviously legally, you have the right to do that, but we were the only ones that the state actually tried to create. And so there's that whole aspect of the social contract where in politics, like we create a policy framework because there was a wide stake of stakeholders and regulated officials and ultimately the people through regulated officials that agreed to have dispensaries where we didn't have them before. Whereas maybe the government makes a mistake and now you have, intoxicating hemp dispensaries, but the state of Illinois and the people never through, a ballot referendum or through their legislators decided to have these things. It's just the federal government isn't good at another thing. They're not good at a lot of stuff and they don't understand weed. Surprise. And so now there's a loophole for people to do things that the federal government is just too inept to fix. It doesn't want to exist. The federal government doesn't want it to exist. They're just stretched thin and doing a whole bunch of different things. So it's kind of a strange argument. That's why they exist. That's it.
Yeah. And I think this is just about the last claim that I had that I wanted you to address. How do you respond to Tom's claim that your dispensary was being positioned across from a park where apparently kids play? I don't know. I tried to look up the map. I'm not from the area, so I couldn't tell what they were referring to. But they said this was part of the reason for some added scrutiny or maybe difficulty you had in opening. How do you respond to that claim?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting point. I guess if you're just taking everything at face value, in terms of the opposition that we faced, then yeah, that might be one of the reasons that some people opposed it. There's plenty of dispensaries in Chicago and Illinois that are across from a park or near a park. There's multiple. I talked about this at the community meeting. Yeah, there's adults in the park. It's a public park. There's kids in the public park. There's also adults in the public park. There's also in the same public park, there's a beer festival every year. There's a wine festival in that same public park every single year. So I don't really understand why. I guess he's saying that's made it a little bit harder. Yeah, that's one thing that added to it. But that's aside from the majority. The bulk of the cost didn't come from that. It came from the regulatory scheme in general, just how difficult it is to get anything zoned in the city of Chicago. But then also it's like this sales floor that I'm in now, where our dispensary would be, used to be a liquor store. So it's kind of like I don't think that it was really ever about the kids. This used to be a liquor store and it was fine. There's a pizza spot across the street and they sell alcohol. And there's a liquor store literally across from us is a liquor store. The liquor store moved from to our location to across the street. So, where's all the 7-Eleven, sells alcohol. Lou Melinati's, which is next door. There's a bar right next to us too, facing the park also. So, yeah, I'm not taking these things at face value and, who knows who is behind, various opposition.
For sure. And then my last question, that's pretty much all I wanted you to respond to from Tom's. But I want to just say, Akili, if you watch, this episode after it's released and you're like, I would like to respond to that. I hope you can tell that I'm trying to approach this even-handedly, give everybody the perspective to speak. So on that note, if there's anything that was said that you felt that we should address, do let me know. And the platform's always open, man. We've always had a good relationship, and I would like to keep it that way and still give you equal opportunity to speak on this platform. So wanted to say that. But my last question, and this isn't related to a claim, it's just because this has been said throughout the interview, and it's something that it was sort of illustrated in one of the questions that I had related to a claim that was discussed with Tom. But this idea that hemp is unfair, and I just sometimes the way that I look at this is like, you're right, it is unfair, like the disparity in what you're required to comply with and what they are required to comply with. But the difference, I would say, is that like just like River Bluff did and GTI and Cookies and Curaleaf did. Like, do you ever foresee a future where you might do hemp? Because like you can do that, and I feel like it sort of takes the air out of the argument that it is unfair, because there is nothing stopping you from getting, at least from my perspective, there's nothing stopping you from getting in hemp. But what say you, like, on that idea, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. No, it's definitely something we discussed and thought about. And, you know, part of me, there's two sides of me on that. Like the pure business person on me, which is like, oh yeah, I gotta get in hemp, like making money, just go make money. You know, the cannabis consumer and lover part of me, I'm just not into those products for the most part, other than the drinks, like, you know, and stuff like that. But like the, you know, all the D8s and D9s and all this kind of stuff, like I just, no, I just like regular weed for the most part, like natural. You know, I get it with THCA, you know, that's different, you know,
Sure.
whatever. But
I was just about to say, it seems like the drinks and THCA and the edibles, like the ones that you know, Curaleaf and GTI, they're making, like they're like literally using the same packaging. It's like their dispensary, and it's like, man.
Yeah,
You
for
know?
sure. I think that is kind of just like a race to the bottom. Like I said, because like the hemp market wasn't created through any intention. It was literally just created through a mistake, that there's not really the same kind of public policy or like, you know, those arguments undergirding it, because there's like no movement to legalize it or do this and that. There's literally just an oversight. And so now we have it. It's not like somebody was like, hey, the people need DA, the people need, you know, D9, hemp derived. Like that movement never existed the way that the legalization movement had. And so I don't really know. I think the people that just jumped into it just saw a business opportunity and they went after it. And from that perspective, you know, kudos. They made smart, true business decisions. But, you know, as a cannabis lover, as someone who's been involved in the movement to legalize the plant and destigmatize it, I don't really see the virtue on that side as much, because it just seems opportunistic more than anything.
Yeah. And I do believe this is my last question. I'm sorry for adding another to the docket, but just because intent was brought up, like, I'm just curious. I've talked to other lawmakers, admittedly, some that represent the hemp people in hemp, but they also represent people in marijuana. I say that in air quotes because it's the legal term, and I would choose not to use that word if at all possible because of its roots in history. But they say that intent in a law is basically irrelevant, and that the clear wording is really what it comes down to. And I want you to respond to that, but also, like, just to give you a practical example, this is the CRTA, and the first sentence is, in the interest of allowing law enforcement to focus on violent and property crime, the General Assembly further finds that cannabis should be regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. And so it would seem that the intent of the CRTA was to give law enforcement the latitude to focus on violent and property crime. But at the same time, as we've kind of established, and you know, I've sort of drilled I've drilled this point ad nauseum on my show through the years, that cannabis isn't completely legal. So that's like an example where it's like, okay, that seems like it's the intent of the law, but look at what it actually is. I know that I just threw a lot there for my last question, but how do you respond to sort of that concept? You see where I'm coming from on that?
Yeah. So I want to respond to two things. Sure. One, in terms of lawmaking, like the intent of a law certainly does matter. And when you're trying to interpret a statute or a law, the intent of the regulators is, you know, if we go to court over it to figure out what something means, you're going to look at what did they intend. That's going to be something you consider. So to the extent that state lawmakers think that it's just the plain letter of the law, it's like, dang, we got to do some more education with our state lawmakers so they understand how law works when they're making it. And that intent does matter. You know, is that the be all end all? Like, no, we also got to look at the plain wording and stuff. But that's also a reason why laws get amended, because they're not accomplishing their intent. You know, it's like spirit of the law and the letter of the law. Spirit is the intent, and that matters. So yeah, and then in terms of the findings, yeah, I mean, you know, with like a statute like that, there's like a lot of different motivations. There were a lot of different motivations for legalization and a lot of reasons different things were addressed. Law enforcement and their lobby obviously had a huge impact on how this came out. And so I think that was in there to say, hey, we acknowledge that, you know, what they in their minds are marijuana crimes and stuff like that are not a large contributor to like social harm. We're criminalizing this thing, but it's not really causing like harm to people or to property in a significant way. So let's focus on stuff that we know is, so like violent crimes and property crimes. And so I think that's why that language is in there. You know, but yeah, there were a lot of motivations for passing the CRTA, in addition to, you know, trying to repair some of the harms of the war on drugs and freeing up. I think that was about freeing up law enforcement's capacity to focus on stuff that we all kind of agree is bad. You know, again, back to like what's illegal. Some stuff's illegal and it's not bad. It's not morally bad. And then some stuff's legal and it's morally bad. And so they're like, hey, this thing is illegal, but we don't actually think it's morally bad. So let's not focus on that so much.
Yeah. Well, Akili, again, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you being willing to come on and discuss this topic, because I know it's one that just hasn't cooled off since it really came up. And you know, I know that I've had a lot of people on both sides of this, and so thank you for being willing to come back on and share, you know, your perspective on this. And you know, I think you get where I'm coming from on this, and probably you get why I'm so fascinated in this, because, you know, setting aside the intent of the law and everything else, like the way that I look at this, it's like, wow, we sort of have like a version of descheduled cannabis, without these like arbitrary restrictions. Like I can buy as much as I want, have it shipped to my door, possess as much as I want. And these are all really cool things that I wish were a part of the CRTA structure. You know, and I guess that's something to work towards. But I just wanted to explain that, not only for my listeners, but for yourself, if you didn't know, like, why I'm so intrigued with this topic. Because to be completely honest, the first time I ever heard about this topic was a little bit before I started the Cole Memo. And my first take on this was like, this is stupid. Like, what the fuck what are people trying to do? Like, really? They're trying to call it hemp, but they're literally selling marijuana. Like, that was my first take. But then when I peeled back like layers of the onion, and I saw like, oh, there are some people literally selling like legit weed, and it's falling into this language of the law, arguably. Obviously, we'll see how this all plays out. And I was like, damn, this is like, you know, since the rescheduling process just started under Joe Biden, I was like, man, this is like, it seems like the first step towards descheduling cannabis. We've got it partially descheduled through this arbitrary distinction called hemp. And I'm just like, man, if we push it the rest of the way, cannabis will be treated like alcohol and cigarettes, descheduled commodities, you know? So.
No, 100%, man. And I appreciate you hosting this conversation, both with me and Tom, and you've been super fair and even-handed as far as I can tell. And appreciate that. And also to Tom, like, I mean, you know, it's like our business interests aren't quite aligned right now, but there's certainly no like animosity on my part, like personally or anything. It's just, you know, policy and business. So, you know, we may not always see eye to eye, but looking forward to that conversation. And yeah, man, you know, I think, you know, the hemp industry, you know, is a critical part of, you know, the legalization efforts throughout the U.S. And obviously, you know, there's the marijuana side, the weed side, and then there's the hemp side. And now we're seeing how those two merge and overlap in ways that we didn't anticipate before. And, you know, they both come from beautiful plants. So not trying to, you know, ban all the products that they produce or anything like that, just trying to get us to a level playing field. So.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Like you said, I think those drinks really have been something like you find interesting, I find interesting. And I think it's gotten like a lot of people that maybe wouldn't have been willing to try cannabis, the ability to try it in a form factor where they'd feel comfortable. But just before we go, wanted to give you the last word. Anything else you wanted to mention before we go, Akili?
No, man, I appreciate you for continuing to, like, you know, do the Cole Memo and, you know, create this platform for us to have these conversations. And yeah, man, it's an honor to be on here again. I like the range of guests that you have and stuff. And so looking forward to this episode, hearing what Tom from Chicago Cannabis Company has to say, and the other folks that are involved in this whole hemp debate. So.
Absolutely. Like I said, looking forward to the next one. Folks, check out the links if you want to support Akili and his businesses. And on that note, we'll see you on the next episode of the Cole Memo. Take care, everybody. All right. Well, that was quite a marathon of an episode. I just got a comment in that says, bravo, Cole Memo, 3 hours of quality episode. Yeah, we're nearing 3 hours. So if you've been with us this entire time, thank you. Be sure to hit that like button, share, subscribe, follow. If you haven't already, if you go to colememo.com/support, that's another way to support the show financially. But I would say the best way to support is just by smashing that like button, telling your friends about the show, and tuning in regularly, just like you did. Thank you once again for tuning in. It is just about 1 p.m. We started the show at about 10 a.m. So again, if you've been with us this entire time, I hope you found value in these conversations. I hope you appreciated how I tried to approach these conversations. You know, I did my best to be fair and give everybody the chance to speak. And I do plan to continue to cover this topic because, like I said, it's been hot since the topic has started. It's not cooled off one bit. And it will certainly be interesting to see how all of this progresses. So once again, thank you all for tuning in. Hit that like button if you haven't already, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. There is a chance that we'll have 1 or 2 more live streams today, but we definitely have another live stream coming this Monday starting around 4 p.m. So be sure to tune into that. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Cole Memo. Take care, everybody.
Beginning January 1st, 2020, the recreational use of cannabis will be legal in the state of Illinois.
Available to stream now, my mini doc dives into the history of Illinois legalization, starting with
January 1st. What should we expect? The biggest thing that we need people to understand is that January 1, in terms of the criminal justice system here in this state, is the end of prohibition.
See how Illinois missed its chance at real cannabis reform with key failures, including the fact that
the program includes regulation on possession limits.
So people can still be arrested for a possession.
And I want to highlight that in its first year of legalized recreational marijuana in the state of Illinois, they arrested 3 times as many black people for possession than any other race.
We've run into so much cannabis, we've run out of places to put it.
I have represented people and taken their cases through the court system who got charged with more serious crimes only because the police said that they smelled cannabis. And not because the police said you have illegal cannabis, or not because you have too much cannabis, or not because you're high on cannabis, but because I can smell it and that's it.
Attorney goes, he understands that he can't be smoking and his cannabis flower shouldn't be open. And I was like, I'd like to say for the record that I was not smoking and my flower was not open.
So that's where we're at right now in Illinois.
Yeah.
And I hope it changes.
Start watching now at colememo.com/minidoc.